All right, we are on. There we go. Okay. Morning, everybody. I'll call this special June 6th, 2020 meeting of the Stow Board of Selectmen to order. This, of course, is the meeting at which we're going to interview candidates for the next town administrator. Before we go any further, since we last met, of course, there were the incident involving George Floyd in Minneapolis, which I think probably everybody just finds absolutely inexplicable. And I would like to have a moment of silence for George Floyd.
Can I also have, we have a moment of silence for all the people who died in the aftermath.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Thank you. All right, to business. Our first interview is at 9:30. There's a few ground rules I want to cover, and for members of the public, just want to clarify one of the candidates, Kate Hodges, withdrew a couple of days ago. So we'll just be doing 3 interviews today at 9:30, 11, and 1 o'clock. I sent around a proposed procedure to the selectmen. Has everybody had a chance to review that? Is everybody basically okay with it? I'll summarize it. So basically what we will do today, first of all, on the subject of masks, a little bit hard to know what to do, but I think we'll start off by asking each candidate what they're comfortable with and be guided by that. In general, what I intend is whoever's speaking probably doesn't want to wear a mask, but if you're not speaking, probably wear a mask. It's up to you, it's up to the candidate. We'll kind of take our lead from them, I think. So I'm planning on, when we have the candidates here, I'll ask them to do a brief opening, and from our list of suggested questions, that'll be essentially question 1. We've read your qualifications and accomplishments. Why do you think you're a good fit for the town of Stow? We do have a score sheet, but as I said in my draft procedures, those will be for the use of individual selectmen in coming up with their own rankings, which we'll discuss at a later time. We're not going to do, as we've done in some interviews, compare numbers and be guided by who's got a numerical score. This is much more of a pure discretionary appointment. It seems inappropriate to do it that way. I'm taking it that you all kind of agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm planning on each individual selectman coming to the Tuesday meeting with their individual rankings 1, 2, and 3, and we'll go from there. In terms of what we're going to do here today, after the 5-minute introduction that they do, we'll each ask questions. We have a list of sort of suggested questions, and by each of us, I mean including Bill. There's no need to stick to the script and to make sure that you ask every single candidate exactly the same questions. They're just for our use. Feel free to freestyle as appropriate. I would like to, for the convenience of the candidate, kind of stick to an order, and it seems best to stick to alphabetical order. So after they do their little opening, we'll start with Ms. Frazier, Mr. Burke, Mr. Ryan, me, Mr. Wrigley, and we've arranged the table so that they can conveniently move their eyes around in one direction. I want to leave 10 minutes at the end. Each interview is approximately an hour, at least that's the amount of time that we've allocated for it, with about, hopefully, a half hour in between. I want to leave about 10 minutes or so at the end for them to ask us any questions, and then wrap up with them by a discussion of the process going forward, which will include when we expect to actually make a decision, our next regular business meeting, that we decided to do more extensive background checks on whoever we enter into negotiations with, and that Corey checks have already been done. Everybody okay so far with all this? Mr. Burke.
Point of information, I reviewed the questions that were prepared not only by the board and its staff, but also by submitted by interested citizens. Are we going to be asking these same questions of every candidate?
No. So, thanks for reminding me of that. In addition to the draft questions that we prepared, that Tom and I prepared, I shared with you all the questions that citizens that have suggested. We didn't get that many, and I indicated to you the two that I plan to use. But I don't plan on using them religiously, and I may pick a couple of others, and they're really there just for you so that residents who suggest this stuff know that the entire board saw them. Use them or not as you see fit. I found more than a couple to be useful. I doubt I'm gonna have time, though, to ask every candidate everything that I really want to ask them, including resident questions, unfortunately, just thinking as a practical matter, how quickly an hour is gonna go by. I know I'm just gonna try to do the best I can. Does that help?
No, that's an answer. I just think that the questions that you and Tom prepared were extremely thorough and thoughtful.
Then-
I can't think of anything else.
Then feel free not to go elsewhere or to freestyle on your own.
Bill
So,
has a question.
oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Wrigley.
I think I believe I sent an email to this effect, under F.
Yes.
I'm going, I'll call it freestyling, but under what has been laid out in 7, and I know they initially, I think we posted those questions, maybe put them down, but I didn't. I was gonna actually provide you with my specific questions, but then I thought if somebody hadn't seen that and they worked off of the other one, I just don't want it. But I'm just going to take the 3 of those 4 categories, which is budget, personnel, and procurement, and I've engineered my own question related to that.
I think that's fine. I was kind of assuming you were gonna freestyle possibly more than any of us, because you might get into more of a technical nature, more of a detailed. You and all 3 of the candidates are, for lack of a better term, in the same industry, and perhaps speak the same language more than the rest of us do. I certainly don't expect you in particular to be bound by any kind of script. I wanna get to something that I want to make sure.
One really quick question.
Yes, Ms. Frazier.
Would you like us to use this sort of as a script and perhaps go, I mean, are we thinking of going slightly in order just to keep track of what we've asked, or
I don't plan on doing
care?
that.
Okay.
I plan on kind of going with the flow.
Yeah.
I plan on, as I see the questions coming around to me, deciding which question on the sheet, if any, I wanna ask. I'm not even sticking to the exact language, to tell you the truth.
Sure.
I've got my own style of speaking, and I'm gonna adjust it to what I see fit. Thank you, Mr. Burke, for that enthusiastic nod. So that's how I'm gonna use it. Really, they're just a tool.
I think you're saying you're not the only one.
Thank you.
There's something that I really want us all to get on the same page on before the candidates come in.
Yeah.
I think it's important, and Courtney in particular, I think you'll agree with me on this, having talked to other towns where they recently hired town administrators. We're still recruiting these people. The power relationship is not what it may initially seem to be with us interviewing them and making the decision. We only have 3 candidates, and we're still trying, for all we know, they have other options, or are exploring other options, and we're trying to make them still want to work in the town of Stow. To that end, we wanna seem, organized and like we have fair amount of unanimity or uniformity in our responses. So there's a few questions that I can think of that candidates may ask us. I just wanna make sure we're all on the same page. And we've had some discussions about this stuff from when we formed the town administrator screening committee. I just wanna, before we go forward, make sure everybody's roughly on the same page with all these things. We may get a question about the transition phase. How do you plan to onboard me? How will you measure my performance, particularly in the first year? I think, and by the way, to any of these questions, I think anybody who feels ready to give an answer, please raise your hand, and that's fine. I'll take it if nobody else is interested. How are you gonna measure my performance? I think any answer to that question has got to involve an agreed-to work plan with the town administrator in that first year. We haven't had something that formal with Bill. I don't think this board has in a long, long, long time. That makes sense when you got somebody who's been in the job for over 20 years. But when you've got a brand new town administrator, I think you've gotta have an agreed to work plan. I have heard this from several other towns that just hired new town administrators. I'm suspecting, Courtney, because you called a couple of towns, that you heard something similar, right? Verbalized, because,
Actually, the answers I heard were, one was, they just kinda dropped me into it. And the other person, was asked to assume the role, so it was, she was hired from within and already was doing the work, so it wasn't,
well, it's everybody, I certainly heard from Boxborough and Acton that they had agreed to work plans, and Boxborough sent me theirs. Is everybody okay with that rough kind of an answer?
man.
Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I
Hart.
think, some of us have been through the process of hiring people, and we know that sometimes you get questions back. Given the extensive work that you've done, and my colleague Ms. Frazier have done with the other towns, I'm willing to let you guys handle those.
Well, I appreciate.
Unless, I think you're saying something crazy.
Right.
Or I want to amplify something, but, I mean,
I appreciate that.
I'm confident in both of you guys.
Well,
It's
Fielding those.
It's a 4-member board, though, so I guess what I'm telling you basically is that would be the nature of the answer I would give.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, we are, all of us, including Bill, probably all on the same page. You know,
Hello.
we're not gonna have, details.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, hi.
No.
Just say hello. Is it okay if I come in?
What do you
We're
want?
just
Could
finishing
you
up
give us a
some.
couple of minutes? Thank you.
10 minutes.
But I agree with Brian. I think we're pretty much all on the same page. We don't have a lot of details, but, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to just run by you is, we may get a question along the lines of, what do you expect from the next town administrator? What kind of town administrator? Are you all with me here?
Yeah.
Okay. And I was gonna, I already talked to Bill about this, I would give an answer along the lines of, we want Bill plus. And I would go through some of the things that Bill, and again, we've all talked about this, but I wanted to pull it together. Bill's got certain, very strong, strengths, financial I would say, financial management, communication at town meeting. I cannot, he's always able to get us through rough patches by explaining to people what we did and giving them the impression, look, we've thought about all this stuff. Judgment was exercised, and it was good judgment, and he gets us through it.
A little more than an impression. I mean, we do it sometimes. He just amplifies
Yes.
that we did do that thinking.
Emergency management, going back to Harvard Acres through the Lower Village, cost overruns last year, even the police chief thing this year, really gifted in coming up with an emergency management plan, for lack of a better word. And the sort of feel for the town of Stow, meaning doesn't micromanage other departments, especially those with separate boards that, that have the role for policy development. And yet there is some centralized personnel control, and that is a tough line. In terms of the plus part, there's certain things that I think Bill would admit, perhaps generational things that are challenges of the more modern workplace, that technological management, and we could probably do more with technology, including our website. Human resources management has become its own industry, and it certainly requires not only policies, but active attention that is difficult to give to it, and we probably have to pay more attention to it. And a few things that frankly the board has never asked Bill, in my memory, to do. The TA or the TA's office going to other meetings, and particularly the finance committee, to provide support there. And I would say, but I may be the only one who believes this, that the TA has a role in helping us fulfill our duty in policy development. Sort of, you're giving us examples, coaching us through, making suggestions, not making the decision, that's us, but that kind of thing. So that's generally how I would answer the question, and I would make clear that that last one may be just me. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's strictly necessary. We've got a lot of work to do today, just in answering their questions. That nobody thinks that the town administrator's job is static, that we don't advance things on the job description as is necessary.
That's a good point. That's a good way to say it.
Actually, genius, Brian.
Let's not go too far.
What did you say? Genius?
Genius.
Wow.
Let's
They're
not go too
being
far.
nice to me because they're only gonna see me one more time.
Tom doesn't use a word like that often.
Why don't I go and get Denise?
Oh, and one last thing.
Yes.
Would the chair please invite all of the candidates, and as I am inviting all of you, to have some of my daughter's brownies, to take the brownies home with you.
Excellent. Listen to get my
I made them last night.
materials.
They look beautiful. She's outdone herself.
No, she hasn't. This is her
Decorative and
standard.
delicious would be nice.
It'll go well with lunch.
I'm
Did
gonna go
you
get
you
Denise.
guys break down and buy lunch? I felt badly about that.
Well, it was me or no one, so at that point,
That's very kind of
I'm
you.
not sure what we're getting, so I wouldn't say anything quite yet. Let's see, what I pick
I
up.
gotta take my mask off so she can see.
Yeah, that's good, I can't, that'd be great, but.
No, you guys all did a good job preparing. I mean,
How do you know?
I've seen the emails. I've talked to you guys, when we've talked about it, you guys are calling around. Yeah, I get the,
I'm ready to throw my phone in the pond.
from the
I'm not kidding.
response I get back from you guys, I think you're, and, was it Marilyn from, town of Maynard? I think you guys are doing more than most towns.
We have,
It's gonna be off to the side.
we are
It is,
ourselves.
but that's okay.
Mr. Wrigley, members of the board, Denise Demkowski.
Hello, hello, nice to meet you all.
Morning.
Nice to meet you all.
It's an awkward time, we're not shaking hands, so. Denise, I'll be speaking, so I'm taking the mask off, we just discussed that. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Oh, thank you.
Really appreciate it. So we've got some water there, and there's a bottle over there. I am
Brought my
going-
own just in case.
Yep, perfect. I'm gonna do what Kathy just
And they're
referred
brownies
to,
that my daughter made. You take them with you
which
because
is try to turn the virtual audience around so that they can see you.
Mhm.
Can you see yourself?
Yes, I can.
Is it too distracting?
No, it's fine.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you didn't recognize the face.
But I'm used to it with meetings anyways with the camera, so it's fine.
Thank you so much for coming in here. Mr. Burke wanted me to remind you that there were brownies that his daughter made.
take them with you.
Feel free to indulge. Members of the Board of Selectmen, Courtney Freisha, Brian Burke, Tom Ryan, I'm Jim Salvi, the chair, Bill Wrigley, our current town administrator, longtime town administrator. Denise, I think we'll just start. Oh, the format, we've allocated about an hour. You know, that's, we'll see how that goes, if it goes, this is the first one we're doing. We'll start off, you can just tell us, we have read your resume and all your qualifications. Tell us something about yourself, what you know about the town of Stow, why you think you're a fit, and we'll go from there. To make it a little bit easier, we're gonna ask questions in order.
Okay.
And we'll just keep going, and then at the end, leave about 10 minutes or so for questions from you, for us.
Okay,
Does that sound fair?
perfect. So I'm Denise Demkowski. I am currently working for the town of Groveland. I've been there for a little over 6 years. My title there is Finance and Personnel Director, but it's a little misleading because I actually function as the day-to-day administrator of the town. By design, we do not have a town administrator. We have a finance director, board of selectmen form of government. I handle everything that a normal town administrator would do, plus treasurer collector duties, so keeps me busy. Prior to that, I worked for the town of Swampscott for 14 years. And prior to that, I was with the town of Billerica for 5. I spent my entire professional career working for the public sector. I knew early on, I was in Billerica for about 6 months, and I realized that it was just a passion I had. I feel that not everyone's made for public service, and when you know, you know. So I knew early on, and it's what I've dedicated my life to doing. I applied here in Stow because I find that, for me, I don't apply for any position. To me, it's not about the title, it's about the community. Stow is very comparable to Groveland. We have about the same population. We have many similarities, which I did articulate on my resume. A call fire department, community preservation, and the group insurance commission. Obviously, you're larger in land size, but even the COVID cases have been spot on comparable. So it's, so to me, it's about the fit. And I just, in researching the community and reading through the documents, your charter, your bylaws, your annual reports, it just felt it was a nice transition for me and for what I can bring to a community. I am very open, I'm very transparent, I do a lot of work with the community, and I just feel, I like the community feel, and I do feel that Stow has that same touch like Groveland does.
Before we go to Ms. Fraser, just let me add, any particular reason that you're looking to leave Groveland?
No, and I told the search committee, and I've actually told my board, it's not that I'm looking to leave Groveland. I'm very happy there. I love what I do. Groveland for the last 3 or 4 years has been tossing back and forth, forming a town manager, a town administrator. I just don't know that they have the momentum at this point. And I saw the position come up, and I just thought it was the right fit, so.
You feel ready to step up, right, got it. Ms. Fraser?
Would you like to expand a little on your philosophies, how you operate your office, your management style?
Sure. So I am, as I said, very open door. It's a small town. I know many of the residents. They come in, they visit. Election day is usually just spent chatting with the residents as they come through. My day starts with, I get in super early to get some work done before the building opens. And then once the building opens, it's a matter of meeting with department heads, meeting with residents, employees on questions, concerns, looking for advice, for guidance. I feel I'm not a micromanager. If someone needs advice from me, they come to me. If there's something I see that's blatantly wrong, I will go to them, but I usually let them, make their decisions and figure out what they need to do. As I said, I'm transparent. Whatever I can put on our website, I put on our website for employees, for residents, my contracts, salaries, they're all out there. My feeling is we have nothing to hide. I've expanded upon the budget when I went there, so that people could see what their tax money is going towards. I know yours is a little, mostly has salary and expense lines. We broke out those expense lines, broke out those salary lines, so people really know what they're getting for their tax money. And I just believe in that. I believe in that philosophy. I believe in honesty. If I don't know an answer to something, I will say I don't know an answer to something. I don't try and make something up on the spot, so that I feel like people develop trust with me. And I think that since I've been there, we've had very smooth town meetings. We've had very smooth any sort of public hearings, just because I believe in putting as much information out as possible. And that's just how I operate normally.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
More?
I'm content for the moment.
Jeez. Has the search committee explained to you that Mr. Wrigley is gonna be staying on okay.
Yes.
Then, I guess my biggest question, and I'm gonna be counting on cleanup over here to my left to ask most of the questions. How many employees are you managing currently?
So the formal authority that I have is for 4 employees. The informal authority is for everybody appointed by the Board of Selectmen. And that's part of the difficulty that I have, is with my title, they cannot bestow any more authority than they've already given on me. because we do not have a charter. My position was created through special legislation, and it clearly articulates what my role is. When I went to Groveland, they added additional roles, they added personnel, everything they could take away from a regular town administrator and give to me, they did. But the formal authority over all employees was not something that town council would agree would fall under my purview as finance director. But unofficially, I do.
When you say special legislation for Groveland?
Yes, it was a special act just for Groveland to create a finance director position.
It's not uncommon. There are a lot of towns that have that.
Okay, yeah, perhaps, and, that's interesting. How many town employees does Groveland have?
So full-time, we have just under 50, we have about 48 full-time employees. We have a fully called fire department with the exception of the chief, who's full-time. The police department would be our next largest department. Our schools are fully regional, our elementary school's on up, so we have no school employees under our control. And then it's really town hall, library, and public works.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that you mentioned is, it looks like you've checked us out a bit. So it sounds like you've read the town charter.
Yes.
What do you think the position of the town administrator in Stow entails, and how might it differ from other communities you've worked?
So I'll be honest, it entails everything I do now. I could go around and circle every single item on the charter for the town administrator duties. There's nothing that I do not currently handle that's listed there. And I do think it's fairly comparable to other communities. I think the positions are fairly standard. Really, it comes down to the difference in appointing authority and what type of appointing authority a manager has versus other communities. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, because like in Stow, Board of Selectmen still appoints each police officer as week chief. Same with the fire department. We have to appoint them every year, and some of it's almost pro forma, after they're hired, but we do our due diligence and so on.
We do the same in Groveland. The police officers, we have a strong fire chief by design, so he appoints his fire staff. The police department, even though he's considered a strong chief, he still forwards a list of recommendations, and the Board of Selectmen sort of bless it once a year for appointments.
Do you think it works better having a town charter versus?
I do. I mean, there's still a process to change those things. I sat on the town charter review committee in Billerica, where I live, a few years ago, just to go through that process. When I went to Swampscott, there was no charter. We went through a creation of a charter, which was interesting. But it's difficult with special legislation because, like I said, we can only get away with so much when it comes to my position because the state actually regulates it. So I think a charter is a little bit easier. It outlines, we don't have any clear hierarchy, boards and committees, everything's either done through bylaw or nothing formal. So I think it helps to have a charter to actually spell out for committee members, residents, employees, exactly what or how the town is managed. I think it's important.
And you think our charter is reasonable?
I think it's reasonable. I think it's healthy to update the charter. I don't know the last time it was updated, but I think it's healthy to update the charter every 10 years or so and go through that process, get an impartial group of residents together to review it and make some recommendations.
We're starting that up again. Sorry, didn't mean to take away your time.
It's okay.
My turn?
Sure.
First, let me clarify something. So how many employees do you actually supervise?
So 4 directly.
Okay, but then you would call it de facto supervision authority over?
Over everybody else. I
Okay.
mean, the police chief, the fire chief, they all technically come to me without going to the board.
Okay.
I'm their point person.
So let me ask you one of those management philosophy questions that job interviews are all about. There's often a tension between the desire to have a collaborative workplace and the desire to get results. Tell me how you handled that, and tell me about a time when you made an unpopular decision and how you handled it.
Well, I think collaboration is great to a point, but like you said, decisions have to be made at some point. I like to have collaborative efforts. I try not to weigh in on it. I let groups sort of come to me with recommendations, and then I would either review them or meet with a group to discuss them further. But I think at the end of the day, you need someone that can actually make a decision and take those recommendations and put them to fruition. A change that or decision, I really don't know of one.
Or even with just an individual.
Well, there's plenty with individuals. I
Right.
mean, there's,
So-
when you deal with personnel matters and residents and unhappy folks, there's always something that someone won't agree with. My philosophy on that is, at the end of the day, it's fine if someone doesn't agree with me, but I would hope they would respect the process and the discussion. So I try and explain what my position is on it, why I made a decision that I did, and I will always listen to the other side. Like I said, at the end of the day, sometimes the decision has to be made.
Can I follow that up with
Go for it.
one hypothetical example that may or may not have happened? You got a tough budget year, you've sent out your budget message, hey folks, looking for no more than a 2% increase. Nonetheless, a department head comes in with a 15% increase for a staff member, ready to argue that person is a superstar. How, if that's never happened, how would you handle it?
No, so that happens every budget season.
Okay.
It just is what it is. So to me, I mean, when it comes to merit increases or personnel increases, I really look at comparisons. I don't like to compare one position to another because they're not the same. But I look to see if that employee has gone over and above their job requirements, their job duties, has completed special projects outside of their sort of realm. This year, I will tell you, we had four salary increases. I only recommended one, and it was for that reason. She clearly articulated what she's done over and above what was required of her. She's shown that she's brought in grant money for the town, and the others couldn't. The other excuses were, well, I've been here 20 years, I deserve more money. And unless you can quantify it and actually justify why, then I can't support it. Part of the issue that we have, and I know it's similar here, is some departments are still overseen by boards and committees. And to me, that's not a fair or equitable way to base salary increases, because there's not one person sort of making that decision across the board. So if a board and committee member likes one employee and not another, they're gonna favor that one employee for an increase versus the other. So I try and take that into consideration as well, and look at them myself and see what contributions they've made to the community. Because I know when it comes to, and sometimes with department heads, there's just personality clashes or there's philosophical differences that might impact those. So I sort of research that myself and help make that recommendation or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Make a follow-up real quick.
Sure.
When you said comparisons, you look for comparisons, were you talking about intermunicipal or intramunicipal comparisons?
Both. So I would I do a lot of salary surveys with other communities to
Okay.
see what the marketplace is. I look at job descriptions specifically because in smaller communities, people wear many hats, so it's sometimes hard to compare one position to another. And then I look at what they're working compared to their peers in the town to see if they're on the same level. You know, you have those employees that show up and work their, full work week. But then there are those employees that go over and above that might put in a little extra or take on extra projects, and to me, that comes into effect as well.
I just,
Let me go to Mr. Wrigley.
but just to point, well, would you like to tell her about maybe Mr. Wrigley would like to tell her about, this is what I was trying to get at, is the results of the survey that Mr. Wrigley initiated on that exact topic that will be able to assist and inform your decision-making in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Wrigley?
I'm glad I preserved my question. In Stow, the town administrator by charter, as you know, is the chief budget / fiscal officer. So pretend for a moment that you're sitting where I'm sitting and your replacement is seated there. As it relates to budget development with some specificity and the fiscal correlations that come with it, what would be a short list of points of interest with regard to budget development, annual budget development, and its implementation? In other words, what would you want to know about me, about those areas of the budget? Just the short list, top 3 prioritized that would come to mind over your experience and your knowledge of budgeting.
That I would want to know from you.
No, that you would want Yes, you'd wanna know about the prospective next town administrator when it came to budget development and implementation, because that's what you do, right? And maybe supporting or not supporting your replacement, what would you be looking for under budget development and implementation? Top 3 points of emphasis. Not every specificity, not,
Right.
there's many aspects of it.
Right, so I think for me, and it's not unlike when I stepped into Groveland, departments weren't involved with the budget process. I'd wanna know how involved departments are. I'd like to see employees get involved in the budget process, not just department heads. I think it's healthy to set goals and expectations during the budget process each year so that it's something quantifiable in the following years.
Could you expound on that, because that is important.
Sure, so, while we don't follow the full GFOA budget model, I've taken pieces of it, and that's one of them. So I ask each department head to put together some goals for that fiscal year, and then the following year I ask them to identify what they've accomplished, what they haven't accomplished. We put an overall goal for the town, or an overall message, and ask if there's anything, departments can do to help satisfy that goal. And I do think that's important to get employees involved in as well. I think getting employees excited about, as excited as you can be about the budget process, but getting them excited about it, interact with the department head, set those goals and be part of that decision-making. I think that's important. I'd like to see specifics, as I mentioned a little earlier. I like to see what goes into those budget line items. A general salary line and a general expense line is great for the department spending the money, but not for me as the town manager or town administrator to see what's actually being spent. I like to be able to trend data, look to see what we're spending in overtime, look to see what we're spending on fuel. As the fuel prices increase or decrease, be able to quantify that in the budget with either cuts or increases. I think that's important.
And an extension of that, trending is important, I agree with you. Budget to actual trending, how frequently and how formal. I'm not prophetic, but I look back real well,
Yep.
which is why trending is important. To what extent do you trend and match budget to actuals? How frequently, how far back, at what level, what details?
So I do it monthly. Personally, I will go through the report, I'll look at where we are. I don't know what you use for software, we use Vadar for our budgeting. So every month I print a report, it shows what percentage we are through the fiscal year and what percentage of the budget has been used, so it's a good visual to just go through. Anyone that's sort of trending more than where we are in the fiscal year, I meet with the department head, I ask them what's going on. Sometimes there are upfront costs that I don't take into consideration that they'll remind me of. After every month as well, we send that same report out to the department heads, ask them to review their budget, make sure everything's on target to what they're expecting, that there's no surprises or there's no expenses that they weren't planning for. And then I do it year by year, more on the revenue side. I compare revenue quite frequently, especially this year and probably next year, just to see where we are in comparison to previous years. Right now we're down about 15% from last year, given mostly with the building department, but it's important for me to know those things. I think if someone questions revenues or expenses, or I get asked frequently from selectmen about budgets, I am able to respond and provide those answers because I do keep a close eye on those things. We don't have discretionary spending, we have a small budget, it's heavily salaries, so on the expense side, I just tend to pay a little more attention to it.
Speaking of revenue projections, state aid, what percentage of your revenues, and extending to that, how diversified is your revenue structure by source? State aid with respect to both the schools, because you're regionalized, and non-school state aid. What
Yep.
percentages relatively to your overall revenues do they represent? And I would suspect that by percentage of total revenues, the schools state aid is a larger portion of the budget, but you tell me. And then with respect to that, what kind of accommodations do you have to make when you're projecting the revenues?
So, the school budget is about 65%, 67% of our budget in total. We don't get, we get very little for Chapter 70. I meet regularly with the school business manager and the other two communities in our region to discuss state aid and to discuss their budget. We actually have not met to talk about fiscal '21 because none of us know what to do with that. As far as our regular state aid for the town, we are relatively a small percentage. However, when we are going through the budget process and cutting, $100 here and there out of department budgets, if we are expecting a 15 to 20% cut next year, that's $150,000 to $200,000 to us, that we can't make up that kind of money.
So the percentage of the total revenues represented by non-school state aid is what, roughly?
It's about
Less than 10%?
less than 10%, I'd say about 7%.
I think I gotta move on to Courtney.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, good questions. It was good to
I'll
drill
catch
down.
up on that.
Yeah. Ms. Gresham?
If you are chosen as our town administrator, can you say what your plan would be for the first week, for the first month, for a year?
Yes, so I think it's important to meet people, number one. I think it's important to meet with employees, department heads, board and committees, and then residents. I would look at, what upcoming events there are, what, if we get back to youth sports, any youth sports events, and just make myself visible. I think it's important for the community to get to know me, to feel comfortable with me, being able to approach me if they have questions. To me, that's a number one priority, is just meeting as many people as I can in the initial 30, 60, 90 days. I always, I shouldn't say always, it would be a priority for me to read union contracts. I think that that's important right off the bat. When I went to Groveland, in my first few weeks, I read the union contracts and immediately started making notes of ambiguous language, confusing language, questions that I have. After so many years, people are like, well, that's what the intention was, but that's not what it says. So to me, it's important to sort of clarify those things, and so when you get into union negotiations, even if you're just clarifying language, I think it helps and strengthens the town's position. Obviously, the budget, going through in more detail, the budget and expenses would be a priority, especially going into fiscal '21, which is full of uncertainty right now. So I think those would be sort of my top 3 priorities coming on.
Okay.
Mr. Burke?
I don't have a question so much as to say, we've got plenty of time here. Don't feel rushed.
Okay.
I know we're running around like a racetrack, but we've still got about more than half an hour, and there'll be plenty of time for you to ask us questions. And I think I'm just listening to the other people's questions, but I did want to mention that chief of our, we didn't get into it, but because, as you well know, one of the jobs of a chief financial officer for the municipality is to try to accommodate different salary requests. Our town administrator for a long time has been using an informal comp process, and then out of fairness, and I would say finally out of maybe, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, just lack of interest in continuing to keep doing that year in and year out, we engaged and we spent some money on a survey of comparable towns, which would be available for you. I don't think we've got the results yet. We've been kind of busy this year. But the results will be available to you, and even if they're not immediately helpful or helpful in the long term, I think they would be useful to find out what kinds of towns we consider comparable. Maybe you could add your own thoughts to that too.
Yes, so I do think you have a salary plan in the warrant, which is more than some towns do. In Groveland, we have nothing. Everything is arbitrary, which I've been trying to work towards rectifying since I've been there, to have some consistency, to know, so employees know what a range would be that they're sitting in. So I think what you have is still better than a lot of communities have. I think it's important for salary and classification plans to take place. I think it's important to have an impartial third-party company do it, even though it is expensive, but it takes all of the questions from employees right off the table. you know, there's no question on favoritism or, you know, who knows who and who does what. Someone can come in, meet with the employees, discuss job descriptions, and really put together a formal plan. And I do think it's important for a community to know who their comparable communities are in many aspects. So that comes into play for, you know, many different things when you're looking at trends around the Commonwealth. It's not just about region, it's about, you know, comparable communities in terms of economics and demographics in the community, population, budgetary size, employees, so on. So I think it's helpful to identify those key communities that you can use anytime you need sort of a comparable metrics. So I think it's great that it's been done here. I'd be interested in seeing the results just where Groveland is comparable. So even if I don't get the position, it will come in beneficial just to see the community comparisons, to be honest.
We're trying.
Is that fair?
It's all public.
Well, I can see that you're zealously advocating on behalf of your municipality. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just looking to save a few bucks, too. It's always a worthy goal. One of the things is, at least we all consider that our staff and the town's employees are one of our really big assets. How would you end up getting to know them, and, you know, what would be your philosophy on trying to interact with them?
So again, I think just being visible. I think walking around the building, if you can walk and ask a question instead of emailing or calling, I think it's important. People see you, you can say hello in the hallway. While I'm not big on chit chat and you know, hanging out, I do like to say hello and check in on people, and if there's a situation I know of, I will ask them how it is and follow up on things like that. When I went to Groveland, my first few years, I held several employee appreciation, if you will, lunches that I brought in lunch for all the staff and have them come in and just spend some time talking with each other. I sort of man the department, so they could sit down and have, you know, a half hour of uninterrupted time. I think that's important. I think it's important to value your employees and show them that, whether it's in just listening to them, being available to them, or being able to provide, you know, a lunch now and then for them. I think whenever I'm invited to a department event, I go, whether it's a, you know, lunch at the police department for an anniversary, I go over there so I'm visible. The fire department, if there's something going on, or if we're holding a Veterans Day service at the fire department, I will go. I think that's a good way to show employees that I'm on their side, that I'm there and I am sort of cheering them on for whatever the event may be.
I'm good. Thanks.
I just want to say, first of all, I'm enjoying this.
Thank you.
I like listening to you. I have a lot of questions for you. Partially, because of the job we have to do right now, but partially also just I would like to mine your knowledge. So I'm going to ask you two questions. I'm going to violate my own rule because I'm the chair and I can do that. First question, let's get away from
Welcome
the
to
financials.
Stow.
Let's get away from the financial stuff for a minute. More long term. You've obviously done some research about Stow. What do you think are some of the challenges that we are facing over the longer haul, let's say 10 years?
Well, I think one of the major challenges is, you know, you are a heavily residential community. The only way, or not the only way, but the majority of your tax revenue is from residents, and they will only allow to be taxed so much. I know you have a lot of excess capacity that you have not utilized, which is wonderful. But I do think the burden of any decision or large decisions obviously falls on your residential folks, which can be very difficult. In communities that have a commercial base, they're easily able to offset those increases. But large purchases, anything that may require an override, I mean, it's a burden. And it can be difficult to get those things to fruition, given, you know, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the economy. You know, we have In Groveland, we passed a $150 million regional middle high school that will hit the tax rate on January 1st, in the middle of what's coming to be one of the worst recessions of history. And, you know, we have to help our residents and find creative ways to not burden them with other expenses, because we know that this is a huge impact to them when there are people that aren't working and, you know, they may not have their businesses going or whatever the situation may be on their end. And I think that's a challenge, and I think that's gonna be a challenge for any small community in the long term, is finding more creative ways to raise the revenue that you have, or that you need to raise because it's heavily residential. I think in addition to that, I think it's maintaining infrastructure. I think that's an important piece for small towns. Infrastructure tends to fall by the wayside because they're more important priorities. And as time goes on and buildings start to diminish, you need to maintain those structures. So, and I think again, the burden of that falls on your taxpayers, or finding creative ways to put together, you know, capital stabilization and build that up in order to pay for some of these expenses. You know, communities are, especially small communities like this, it's primarily salaries in your expense line. So if you need to make cuts, you're looking at personnel. Those are difficult decisions to make in the long term.
Can I stop you and just ask a follow-up there? So, capital stabilization, that will be like a set-aside fund like we do for OPEB? Okay.
Yes, so you can create a capital stabilization that the money could be used just for capital projects or to pay the debt service on those capital projects.
Or you have free cash.
Yeah.
For, right. So let me just follow up on that with, great answer, very true answer. How do you approach that? And this may be an unfair question. The answer may be, well, that's what the job is all about. How do you approach that in a place where 63% of your budget is a regional school district that you barely control, where only 14% of your budget is municipal payroll cost, and 7% of that, half of it, is unionized?
Mm-hmm. Yep, again, I just
That's
think.
the answer.
Right, I mean, I just think it comes down to wants versus needs when you're budgeting. I think you have to be smart when it comes to budget decisions, because again, it's not discretionary. We have very little control of, you know, budgetary costs, and exactly, I mean, 63% goes to the schools. You know, you can say you have a say because you could vote it down, but in our regional agreement, where 3 communities, if 2 out of the 3 voted, it's approved. So there have been a couple times over the last 6 years that a couple of, you know, 2 of our communities have sort of banded together because we didn't like the numbers coming out of the school. But instead of taking it to town meeting floor, we've gone back to the district and said, we can't live with these numbers. You need to make cuts before it comes to us, because we will actively fight against it. We just can't see it. We just can't see it through. And they've worked with us. We have a great relationship with the school. And I think that's important too, because when it comes time for decisions, and especially managing your budget, you have to start there. With such a large number going right to them, you have to find ways to work with them, not against them. And then the same thing, I think union contracts, you know, and I haven't seen yours, but you know, ours are to the point that the only thing to negotiate is salary. You know, there's only so many benefits you can continue to give out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's only so many days off that you can give people. So I think it just becomes smart with getting your contracts to a place that it's a healthy negotiation. And I know I read in one of your letters that you're proud of your negotiations over the years, that they've been mostly amicable, and I think that's important.
He had a union disband.
Oh, really? Very nice.
I think that put us in the history books.
Probably. But I think that's important to have respectful negotiations so that people understand what the position the town is in and what the position the unions are in. I think that's important for long-term success. And again, just sort of figuring out what needs to be done and when, and prioritizing sort of the larger expenses that you know are going to take budgetary impact, and whether or not you do an override or find a way to manage it within your own budget. I think that's important, and I think that goes a long way in the community.
Before I yield the floor, back to my 10-year question, anything non-financial that comes to mind in terms of challenges that we're facing?
I mean, none that I can think of, other than, some of the recent events that took place in Stow. I think rebuilding sort of the community's trust, and employee faith, I think is important. I
Yep.
think, good PR, goes a long way. Regardless of what the outcome is, regardless, you know, I understand innocent until proven guilty, but I do think, accusations at that level may impact a lot of your residents, and I think trying to build that back up is important. That's probably more short term than long term. But who you hire to be the next police chief, I think will have an impact on your community. And I think those types of things are important, for the community.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bill?
I'll just extend with another question with respect to budgeting. So I've included in my annual report for as far back as I can recall that our structural impediments in the budget equation are on the revenue side. I believe, as is the budget this year I'm offering, which is almost 2% below the current year, that we're controlling our expenditures by degree, and it's a difference of degree and not kind, but there's not as much work to be done there as the fact that it's a revenue-driven process, and on that side of the equation, we have an undiversified tax base. And trying to expand and diversify that tax base is the only way long-term that I think structurally. We have a large percentage of our acreage which is abated and exempted. We've got multiple golf courses and all the rest, which again, restriction, as you know, we're now at about over 90% residential as a percentage of the total revenues. Economic development is a broad term, and in a prior life I did some of it, and I was thinking coming here that, you know, I was gonna be successful at offering economic development. Well, my approach is, given the nature of our community, the quintessential New England town, didn't. Any thoughts on being able to, so how diversified is your revenue side? Meaning to say, any commercial, industrial, or you got any hotels, meals taxes of any kind?
No.
So you're pretty much.
We have one, what I would call corporation, that we were lucky enough to move their world headquarters to Groveland. We have a municipal light department, so we have very low, electric rates. We have a low water and sewer rates. If they left our town, we would be stuck. We have no hotel tax, meals tax. I think we have 3 restaurants in town. We have very little business, and we don't have room for business, quite frankly. Anything that could have a potential revenue source, the town has come out against it. We had an opportunity to put a medical marijuana facility in town, not a retail, just a grow facility. Would have meant huge revenue for the town. The residents came out against it. The board voted it down, and we will not have that type of revenue. And that, from a financial point of view, I wouldn't weigh in on the pros and cons of the concept. But from a revenue perspective, you can't turn down that kind of money. I mean, it's just incredible what that could do for a community. So in my opinion, you have to be smart with what you can try and bring in. We created a sort of 1-page about Groveland flyer that we could distribute. I work very closely with the Regional Planning Commission. I've worked with the Mass Office of Business Development, trying to get us on their radar. I've actually signed us up for the Mass Film Department in case there's anyone that wants to film in town. Anything that I could do to try and bring exposure to Groveland, I've done. It hasn't helped because, again, there's really no place to go in town, and the residents don't want anything commercial.
Do you have an EDIC or anything comparable?
Nope.
So you'll feel comfortable here.
Do you have water or sewer?
With respect to ED.
Half the town has sewer.
Okay.
Most of the town has water. We do have some well water, but only half the town has sewer.
Do you have a downtown with water, sewer?
Which you can call a downtown, yes.
Yeah.
We do.
Okay. Ms. Fraser, sorry.
Sorry. So hypothetically, the town is suddenly faced with an issue that it's never wrestled with before, nor have you. It's technically complex. It involves public health, environmental, financial, liability, and facilities issues. The selectmen turn to you for leadership. What are the first several things that you would do?
Hypothetically, you're dealing with the current coronavirus, because it sounds pretty much like what we're going through right now.
Or something.
I mean, I will say, the current challenges with the coronavirus are something, nothing like I've ever seen before, in all of those terms.
Yep.
Keeping the community safe, keeping the buildings safe, keeping employees safe, the financial impact, it has been what I would call astronomical. The amount of data, I'm sure you can attest to the emails that come around, the data that comes around, the calls that we have to be part of. And so from my point of view, my role in all of this has been to keep my board informed. We have gone to meeting every Monday since this started. I think we finally stopped that. This week would have been our last Monday COVID meeting. But we found it was important to keep the community apprised of any information that we knew. I, every Tuesday, put out a formal statement to the community. I put out a town-wide phone call. I put out a formal statement on our website that goes to Facebook and Twitter, again, with any pertinent information that the community needs to know. And then I just work closely with, working with the Board of Health very closely, our public health nurse. I meet with them regularly to discuss any needs they have, any constraints with budget, supplies, and just, trying to work our way through. We have our election is next Monday, how we're going to work our way through the election and keep people safe. I have town meeting the same night as yours on the 22nd, how we're gonna keep people safe at town meeting. And those are the things that I never thought I would have to think about or deal with in this position. But yet we have, and I do think we've all sort of adjusted accordingly. And there's right and wrong ways to do things, and there's always someone doing it better. And I feel today is Bill Ricca's election, so I'm gonna go there after and see how they're doing it and see what precautions they're taking that we might be able to use in Groveland. But I think my role in that is really to facilitate facts. I think so often, and that's why I put out a weekly statement. We have, local Facebook gossip pages, and it's just that, it's gossip, it's not true information. I always say, if someone calls me and asks, I'll tell you the answer. Don't just assume and post things. So I like to put out the true fact, exactly how many cases we have, how many quarantines we have, what facilities are open, anything that the residents need to know, right from me, so that there's no question on what the correct information is. And I think that's really helped. It's helped the board make their decisions. It's helped residents feel comfortable. And I just think it goes a long way in the community to letting them know that we're on top of things. We're working on the CARES Act funding, which I submitted last week to try and get some reimbursement from the state. We're looking at other creative ways to find money to make changes that we need to, and add partitions to town hall offices and things like that.
Great.
Mr. Burke?
Speaking of Groveland businesses, didn't Groveland have a drive-in theater way back?
We had a racetrack.
Oh, the racetrack.
We had a speedway racetrack.
With a movie theater?
I don't believe there was a movie theater, no. it was-
Maybe I misremember. I knew it was some kind of public entertainment.
Yes, it was a motor speedway, that we have a reunion every year with the classic cars come back.
Oh, okay.
It's now a full recreational area where we have that's directly next to town hall, so it's a nice complex now.
I do remember there was a feature of that. I was trying to remember. What's your tax rate in Groveland?
1452, lower than yours.
Yeah. You ever been close to the DOR warning number?
Nope.
Okay, thanks. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask us questions.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think we've got about 8 more minutes, and then we'll
Mhm.
open it up to Denise. Mr. Ryan?
What do you think your weakest attributes are, and how are you working to strengthen them?
I would say my weakest attribute is I take too much on. And I find that I say yes to whatever needs to be done, whoever needs to have help, and then it puts my own work on the back burner because then I'm helping and doing too much else. I wear many, many different hats in Groveland. And I sometimes feel that the workload is unmanageable. So since I've been there, I have removed some staff and brought in some new staff that is much more capable of handling duties, so I've been able to delegate much more. And I think that that has helped me get more accomplished and get more done in the manner that I would like it to, the finished product to be. I take a lot of pride in my work. I feel like I'm very detail oriented, so when I rush through things, I don't often like the outcome. So I think having some staff and being able to delegate a bit more has helped me deal with that weakness.
Sounds like you're working on it, which is good.
Trying to, yes.
Oh, okay. I want to ask two questions again. People often talk about regionalization as a way to cut some costs. What has been your experience? What do you think the pros and the cons are? Do you have a philosophy on it?
So I think it's healthy when it works. When I went to Groveland, had a regional health agent, and I have regionalized, you can call it regionalized, our building department. So we share a building inspector with our neighboring community, and it actually works wonderfully. He is able to, if there's an issue in the next town, he can dedicate more time to them. If there's an issue in our town, he can dedicate time to us. I think it's helped us save money, not a ton of money because there's not a lot there, but we share health insurance costs, we share expenses that he has with cell phone bills and mileage and things like that. And in that aspect, I don't see a downside. We've talked locally about, regionalizing Board of Health services more than just the health agent. I don't know if that will come to fruition just because the Board of Healths have a lot of power. And that if they're not on board with it, obviously it's not gonna go anywhere. We've talked about regionalizing some other services and some other projects like street sweeping, things like that, that we can work with other communities to save some money on contracts. I think as long as you have communities that share similar goals and are open to those types of ideas, I think it's important to at least have the discussion and see what can come of it. Again, I don't really see a downside unless there's issues with timing or staffing, but to me, it's all been beneficial.
My second question, you may have seen in our charter, it says quite explicitly, selectmen shall stay out of day-to-day operations and concentrate only on broad-based policy. We can only guess as to the story behind that language. What role, so obviously one of our primary responsibilities is the development of policies. And what role do you see the town administrator having in that, if any?
I think the role would be to either facilitate information that you may need, provide examples from other communities. I know we joked about it earlier, but there's no shame in plagiarizing when it comes to municipal policy. Get a bunch of them from communities and see what works. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. So I would see that as my role. And then offering advice. Obviously, you would set the policy. More than likely, I would be the one implementing it. And I think it's important for us to be on the same page as far as what your goals with that policy are, and how you would like to see it implemented and what benefits you would like to see, so that I can then make that come to fruition. I think that's important.
Thank you. Mr. Wrigley.
Just to follow up on shared regional services, because it is a pretty popular topic with a lot of folks, as you know, if you've been in the business a long time. Some subject matters and services don't lend themselves well to it, don't. Speaking of street sweepers, we tried sharing with a neighboring community. The problem is everybody wants their street cleared at the same time, and then you end up basically having to double up on the street sweepers because of that inability to coordinate times when they would do it. We tried regional dispatch at one time, and that with some neighbors, and that didn't. But with our mutual aid agreements, so all the important subject, so we've got shared ALS with many communities. Most of our important functioning services in public safety and such. We've got regional planning with MAPC. Obviously, our schools are regional. We've got a consortium for employee health care.
Yep.
With, are you part of a consortium?
We're in the GIC as well.
Okay, and through our consortium in Worcester. So we regionalize much. Our health, our Board of Health shares, we share a nurse and health agent, so we've expanded a little bit more than you have. So I'm a proponent of it, but I don't think everybody knows that it's just not that easy sometimes, and that's, some services aren't efficient and cost effective sharing it with others. Did you find that,
I do. I think when it works well, it works really well. I think when there's issues, then it works really badly and it causes some dissatisfaction. I think some communities have had a very difficult time with regional dispatch, and I understand that. Just before I left Swampscott, we regionalized with Lynn for our dispatch through a large state grant. And there were some challenges with that, with even just a language barrier between the Lynn dispatchers and the Swampscott folks that, you know, didn't like calling 911 because they didn't like who was on the opposite end, or just, you know, the language issue, or streets being confused and things like that. But it all works out well and it runs great today. So I think as long as you try to move forward with it and you give it a good faith effort, if it doesn't work, you need to just admit it doesn't work and walk away. But I think that there are places that you can, you know, maybe there's no more regionalization efforts here other than what you've already done. But to me, it's always worth looking into. It's just another way to provide better services at a cost savings.
a comment that you briefly made with regard to, right up front, it's communities' expectations. Every community is different about how much they'll spend for what service, and sometimes, because there was an effort to include an additional local community in our school district, and it was a mismatch of expectations on both what they'll spend and the other communities. So that to me is the biggest thing. Can you match up expectations, delivery of the services, who gets the street sweeper when, to see whether it would work.
And I think communication though is key. I think if you have good communication going in and discuss those things up front, and have everyone on the same page, then obviously there's more of a belief that it will work than if there's not great communication, or if you don't have all those things outlined from the get-go, then it just won't work.
And some communities will spend more than others, it's just a fact,
Yeah.
on a level of service. And
Well, and
you've got-
some have more to spend than others.
Right, so if you don't have it, trying to match up a service where the other one does have it and wants to spend more, it's an
Right.
incompatibility of use.
Yep, yep.
So I'm thinking that I want to ask Denise if she's got questions for us at this point, unless any selectman has a last question that they just have to ask.
Do you have any questions of us?
Yes, so I would like to know from all of you, you know, what you were looking for in a replacement for Bill.
We've discussed this. I'll take a crack at it. You know, you're dealing with a currently 4-headed hydra. Soon, you know, it'll be back to a 5-headed hydra soon, so.
I'm in the same situation, by the way, in Groveland.
You know, we're not looking for much. We're looking for Bill plus more. We're looking for someone who can hopefully do all the things that Bill has done very, very well, and then shore us up in some areas that, you know, as towns change, as demographics change, we need more help. And to be specific about that, Bill has been fantastic about financial management. We don't have the time to talk about where he has taken this town from and where he got it to, but that has always been one of his strengths. He is invaluable at town meeting. You know, we'll hit a rough patch where people are asking some departments skeptical questions, and Bill stands up and talks about the process that went through to reach the decision, and basically says, look, this was a reasonable decision, here's everything we considered, and it gets approved. His communication at town meeting in particular has been completely invaluable, as I'm sure you can appreciate. A flair for emergency management. When it's an all hands on deck kind of moment, he's fantastic at the logistics of that kind of thing. And I can, in my tenure, going back 10 years, we had a section of town that was on the cusp of having no water, long story. more recently in our police chief situation. Significant cost overruns only last year in a big roadway project in our lower village. He's really, really good. He's also very good at the fit, and you could hear more about this in Stow, the fit for Stow. And from the town administrator's perspective, what that really means is kind of a hands-off approach when it comes to management, not a micromanager, especially with those staff that are overseen by a separate board, separately elected or appointed, and yet some centralized personnel function because the town administrator is. On the plus side, you know, there's a few, I would say, generational things. We could probably use a more robust technology structure. We could, I think most of us agree, we could probably use our website more effectively. Human resources, we need a more robust structure there. We don't have a formal HR policy. We certainly need one. You know, I'm a litigator, and I have had a lot of employment-related cases. I know in today's environment, if you want anything to stick, you're going to need a book with policies. Certain things that we haven't asked him to do, at least not in recent memory, that we probably do need someone to do. We need the town administrator or someone from that office, someone representing the town administrator, to go to a few more meetings other than selectmen, probably finance committee. I can't really think of anything beyond that, but occasionally. And I may be alone on this one, but in our policy development role, I think we need the kind of assistance, frankly, that you talked about, that, you know, somebody who can, I thought you said it well, that you, plagiarism's fine when you're talking about municipal policies. But we need that kind of hint. It has been at the ad hoc initiative of the Board of Selectmen in recent memory. It's okay, but we could use a little bit more structure and assistance there. Did that answer that question?
Yes, it did, thank you.
Could I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
This is personal style, but I feel as though Mr. Wrigley brings a thoughtfulness and a particular way of handling sensitive things, issues, which is wonderful. I think he's fair and kind is probably one word, but I just think he's thoughtful not to do harm if he possibly can, and that's incredibly valuable.
Tom?
To expand on Jim's a little bit as far as policies and so on, one of the things that I think we've done well is we haven't created policies that we don't need just for the sake of creating policies. When we find we do need something, in some cases it may be in relation to something that's happened, and so we develop it. But personally, I'm not looking to change the world. I'm looking to keep Stow a sleepy little town, keep our taxes down, you know, meet the needs of the residents, things like that, without, I'll say, going overboard and trying to convince people of things that they don't necessarily need. You mentioned, you know, needs and wants. There are an awful lot of wants around, and all it takes is money that we don't necessarily have. So Bill has done a very good job with that. So for a new town administrator, I probably am not looking for somebody to come in and say, hey, let's try all these neat new projects. You know, in the future, I think, you know, listening to different ideas will be very important for us, but I'm not looking for somebody who wants to come in and I'll say change the world overnight, especially until they understand what we're doing here. So.
Right. May I respond to that?
Yes, I was going to say,
Please.
I want to make sure we get to your
Yeah,
question.
we
No,
want
so
you.
I would just like to say to that, I don't think anyone should come in and expect to change the world. No one should want to change Stow from what they currently are. it's important to not come in with those expectations, because you need to be in the community, work in the community, and figure out what the community, you know, desires, and how they wanna be. My job wouldn't be to propose changes, although I do like to be proactive. So if there are things that we can implement that we should be or will need to have, I like to do that proactively. But no, my intention would not be to change the community or change the style of the community or bring in, you know, a Walmart that people don't want in the community. It's really about what the community wants that will drive how I do my job.
We're gonna get a Walmart?
Great, very good example to illustrate your point.
You know.
She said no wall.
Oh, I know, he told me.
Listen, Brian,
Listen more
listen.
closely,
Hey.
Mr. Burke.
Speak up.
Do you have any other questions?
I think just one more. So, I think to your point, Courtney, that you had asked, you know, what would you like to see in the first 30 days of a town administrator? What would you like to see the first priorities be? To any of you, or?
I'll take,
I liked what you said, of getting to know people, and that's, I think being available and having people, able to see how we're gonna go forward, who they're gonna work with, and be able to you know, voice their opinion and ask you questions. I hope you'll be ready for diverse opinions.
no. For me, I think, you know, I like your answer as far as not wanting to come in and change the world. Talking to people, find out what kind of a swamp you've gotten yourself into, and, you know, working things through, I think is good. And I think, you know, that Mr. Wrigley has agreed to stay on as needed, which I suppose, you know, I think you'll probably be able to get a lot of history from him if you get the position, and really to be able to listen and find out, you know, where things stand. You know, I think you know that we may, given the coronavirus thing, it's gonna upend the world. So I would hope that you would be able to think quickly, I'll say, you know, that, you know, be able to, it sounds like you've got the right stuff to do it. So but to be able to come in, work with people, find out what the situation is, and, you know, and then go from there. You know, that's my view, you know, not, like I said, not to change, you know, upend everything, but.
You wanna have something you wanna add, or can I?
No, the only thing I can think of is our chair said, Bill Wrigley plus. To my mind, that means somebody who laughs at my jokes.
Which is
I
different.
laugh at you.
That disclaimer said last
you
for
for it.
in
We're always
contract
laughing,
negotiations. So what, I think I would start off with what you wouldn't see, what the successful candidate would not see. Unless they wanted it, they would not see 30 days of meetings already set up for them with various department heads and, you know, an employee forum on this date. I would hope to see someone who comes on board and initiates all that kind of stuff. As you said, walks around, drives around, introduces themselves. What the successful candidate probably would see on their desk, I hope, is on the first day, a binder, because I go back to 80s technology, that has a short description of each department and some key documents, something you can just flip to and even add to.
Brought it with me.
There
I
you
made
go,
my own.
binders. Never been improved on. From some of the research that we've done with other towns that recently onboarded town administrators, some of the things I've heard, I love this. Current town administrator described how he got tours of the town from, I think it was the DPW supervisor, the fire chief, police chief, someone else. He got 4 different tours of the town and noticed that he saw 4 different sides of the town.
Wow.
You know, I would love to see something like that. And I also think at around the end of the 30-day period, once the successful candidate has their feet wet and is oriented, entering into discussions with the board on an agreed work plan for the first 6 months, a year, whatever. So I think that's what I'd like to see.
That's great.
And I'm here to help.
So, and we're anticipating Bill will be here one
So,
day a week, is that what you?
I
deemed to be?
budgeted 8 hours a
8
week,
hours,
so it
yeah.
need to be 2, 4, and I'll be up on the 3rd floor in the closet. If you need it up. Anyway, so we'll
Okay.
spend a lot of time together.
Excellent.
Anything else? Any concerns, any,
No? Any concerns that I can answer for you?
No, we don't want to give you too much more time than we're going to give the other two candidates, and we're already,
Understandable.
otherwise, we're going to be here until 4 o'clock.
I know you have a long day ahead of you.
Denise, thank you so much. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciate this, enjoyed it.
Just one last thing.
Yes, please.
After sitting here and us grilling you for an hour and so on, you know, obviously subject to negotiations, do you think you would be happy in Stow?
I do.
That was a good way to phrase it.
I do. I wouldn't have applied if I didn't think I would be happy in Stow. And nothing that happened here this morning would have changed my mind on
Well, we didn't do any harm.
that. No,
Well,
not at all.
You know,
Not at all.
that was part of it, you know, do no harm, you know.
You accomplished that very well.
Good, you know, part of it is, I think we've got a very good board currently, and, you know, we work well together. So sometimes it's been a little more contentious in the past, but as I'm sure you've seen over the years, the boards change and dynamics change, but we managed to get back to an even keel eventually.
So with that, thank you very much. A last reminder about Gwenny Burke's brownies. You earned
She's
one.
a good baker.
She works at Star Market, North Station.
I will grab one.
Thank you.
Thank you so
They're
much.
small.
Thank you. And Stow TV will be taking a break until about 11.
Shake your hand right now.
Same here.
I know.
Hold that
Nice
good
to
thought,
meet you.
because a few months from now, maybe you're not saying that.
Maybe.
I can't
Pardon
We sprayed down the chair, that's new water,
New, oh, that's,
Fresh
yes.
water.
fresh water, sorry.
Not the
I
brown,
just-
not the black.
It's fresh water. Well, we're not really that funny, actually.
I'm still
We're good.
picturing you as a bouncer. Like, I
Yeah,
don't-
see, I knew you were over
See,
there.
I'm used to seeing Brian on the Zoom screen when I watch your meeting.
Oh, I see, well, just
You're like a
keeping,
star.
no, please don't, it's just gonna encourage
Well,
me.
let's burst that bubble right
And the other thing is, I'll probably be voted out of office, and you'll be dealing with someone more serious than
Well,
I am.
you know,
Courtney Freisha, in
Courtney,
addition to
nice
Brian
meet
Burke.
you. Thank you.
Brian Burke, Tom Ryan,
Tom.
Nice to meet you.
Nice
Jim
to meet you
Salvi,
all.
Chair.
So
Nice to meet you.
just bear that in mind when you're interviewing.
Gotcha.
Have a seat.
Thank you. Oops.
That's you. Got some water there.
Thank you.
Please help yourself to some brownies. Those are from Brian's daughter.
Oh, thank
She
you.
works at Star Market, she bakes, so she's a
Oh,
baker.
nice.
They're very good.
Kelly, I need to, we're on Zoom as well as Stow TV. I'm gonna turn this
Oh,
around.
okay.
And we're gonna try to make sure that residents can see you, but I don't
Sure.
want it to be distracting at the same time.
No worries.
Can you see yourself?
I can see myself. Thank
Okay.
you.
Is that too distracting?
Yep.
Okay.
Not at all. Not at all.
Thank you very much for making the time to come in here today. It was just distracting to me, but that's all right.
Hold on. Okay.
So, the way we're gonna do this, we've allocated about an hour. And we're gonna start off with just a, general statement from you about, we obviously have read your resume, we know your qualifications. What makes you think you're a fit for the town of Stow? Tell us what your story is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll ask individual questions. We're gonna ask them in order, starting over there with Courtney and going around. And then I'll try to leave at least 10 minutes at the end for questions from you.
Great.
Does that sound fair?
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
So I introduced everybody, and so I think that's all. I think it's all up to you.
Great. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's well, other people are at home during these isolating days, watching Downton Abbey for the 5th season. I have been binge watching all of your meetings, so I feel like I know you. It's just nice to see you face to face instead of through a Zoom lens.
Oh,
so.
I am sorry to hear that.
No, it's been great. It's been a real great way to sort of understand some of the issues you're dealing with and to understand a lot of the, to see the personalities and the jokesters who.
I will be gone probably, so you don't have to, really, don't play to me.
No worries. So I'll start out by telling you something that's not on my resume. Well, my name, of course, is on my resume. So I'm Kelly Hebert. I'm just really thrilled to be here. Something that isn't on my resume is the fact that I've lived in Lowell my entire life. In fact, part of my story of why I got into this career path has to do with the city of Lowell. But I have a wonderful husband, John, going on 25 years. We were hoping to go on a special trip in September, but of course, this global pandemic kind of got in the way. So we've survived a lot more. I'm sure we will survive this, but I have 3 great kids. 2 are in college, 1 is in high school. And I think that my 30-year experience in municipal government has led me to this very time and place. It occurred to me yesterday as well that when I was coming back from Washington, D.C., I was a sophomore in college, and this was 2 years before Bill started working here, actually. I started doing the math, and I had an issue with my mom had just purchased a house. My father had passed away. We bought our first house. Before he passed away, we were eligible for a VA housing loan. So we were fortunate. My mother's a first-generation homeowner. I'm a first-generation college graduate. She was very proud of that house. And so I would come home from college and see trash lined up against the side of the fence. And my mother would always complain about it. The neighbors, they don't care about the neighborhood. They don't care. And I said, well, Mom, instead of complaining, have you called anyone from City Hall? Have you talked to anyone? And she said, I wouldn't know who to call. And I said, well, I mean, it's not rocket science, Mom. You open up the phone book. Look, here you go. I opened up the phone book. I said, City of Lowell, City Manager's Office. Start at the top. If they're the wrong place, then we'll go. We'll keep calling. And this was a Saturday. I said, Mom, I'm going to write down the phone number, and I want you to call, because I'll be back at school on Monday. And so she called the city manager's office, and the next weekend I came home and there was no trash. In fact, there were no barrels, there were no bags lined up against the fence. And I said, what happened? And she said, you're not going to believe it, but I called City Hall, and before I knew it, there was an inspector out, and he talked with them, and he talked with the landlord, and he told them that they can't put out their trash before trash day, and they needed barrels. And she said, I just thought that they didn't care what I thought. I just thought that they wanted to collect my taxes, and that's it. And she said, I'm just so grateful and thankful that somebody was there to help me. And I think it was like one of those wow moments where I realized that, local government really does have an impact on a lot of people's lives, and in the smallest ways that you might not ever consider. But that made her feel the ownership that made her feel proud to be a homeowner, not resentful, not frustrated, not feeling like nobody thought that she had a voice. And so that was my sophomore year in college after coming back from DC. And it was also a pivotal point in my career because I thought, Washington, DC is very beautiful and nice. Well, not these days, but in the 90s it was pretty nice. So I came back and I realized that was nice, but being home and helping people solve these little issues really made a difference for me, and that's really why I'm in this career path. So that's the story that's not on my resume. It's why I'm here, and I also just need to say that my husband and my family completely, my husband's a paramedic, so we are used to public service. My husband understands that this isn't just a 40-hour-a-week job. This is a 24/7 commitment. It never ends, even when you're off the clock, even when you're not in the office. The job continues, and if there's a public health emergency, if there's a snowstorm, that you're on duty. And even if it's just overseeing the other department heads and making sure that everyone is doing what they need to be doing, that you're responsible, that it's up to you 24/7 to make sure that you can do what you can do to make sure that the town runs smoothly. So anyway, that's a little bit about my background and why I'm here. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Why don't we start with Ms. Fraser?
So, Kelly, have you read the town charter, and what do you think the position of town administrator in Stow means?
Well, the charter, I have read it. I was reading the bylaws. I read the town meeting warrant. Bill was very gracious to offer me a copy of the latest budget. So I've done a lot of research, and you know, the charter, you should be the town should be commended for having a charter. I mean, there's a lot of small towns that just go, you know, on a wing and a prayer in some cases, and by that I don't mean like they don't take themselves seriously, but I'll give you an example. In Topsfield, we didn't have a charter. We've had, you know, you have the state law, then you have a series of bylaws. And the bylaws are then connected with your regulations, and then you've got your internal policies. You've got policies that are written or not written. What I find very hopeful and very advantageous is having the charter is that it eliminates the need for ambiguity, that it allows a town administrator to have a question from someone who doesn't understand how the town works, and it gives you a reference point. It says, you know, we can't do that, but we can do this. And why? The charter tells us so, and we have to follow the charter because that is the law. And yes, the regulation or your preference might make sense, but we still have the charter, and that's what we're obligated to follow. This position is very clearly lined out in the charter, which is great. I mean, some of the ambiguity and confusion that I've seen in other towns, and I've worked in Chelmsford, Chelmsford has a charter, but then I also worked in Belmont, and it has a bylaw. And then, of course, Topsfield, it just has a bylaw. And many of those bylaws, you know, can be easily outdated, and then people sort of forget that they're there in some cases, and then they tend to make up rules as they go along. That isn't the case here. It's very well formulated, it's very well written, it's out there, and if there is a question, then you can follow up with, okay, here's an issue, how do we change it, and how do we move forward? So the position of town administrator is very clearly written out. The other thing I noticed in the charter is that you have, I'm sure you have a separate personnel manual, but the personnel bylaw is very detailed, very good. And I was reading through the bylaw and I thought, wow, there's a lot of issues that I read that you have a bylaw for. But a lot of the issues that I had to deal with in Topsfield really had to do with the fact that a lot of the same things were not written down. They weren't part of a bylaw. When someone was upset with something or the payroll or something, I could point to, you know, in Topsfield's case, sometimes I could point to the personnel bylaw, sometimes I couldn't. But here you can, and that gives you the guidance and the information in black and white that you can use to justify your positions, because a lot of those decisions can be hard to make, but if you can point to the charter, you can point to the bylaw, you can point to state law, it makes it a lot easier for you to communicate with people and make sure that there's no misunderstanding, and you can also manage expectations.
Could I just follow up on that? So in a situation where you don't have something to refer to, where you don't have the charter or the bylaw that's specific enough, how would you approach that? You know, is there anything that you think, you know, just how would you deal with that in your job, and how would you see it in a larger context over a period of time?
Right. That's a great question, because I don't want to give you the impression that everything is, you know, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it, right? If you could point to the bylaw and say, well, this is the rule, that's all there is to it. In this line of work, you need the stability of having a charter and those bylaws so that people understand where you're coming from. On the other hand, you need experience, you need relevance, you need to acknowledge that the rules, the laws are changing constantly, all the time. And there's no one set way to resolve any one issue, because there are just so many. As a manager, as an administrator, you need to know, based on the issue, what's your next course of action. So, but sometimes it really just starts with a discussion, a one-on-one with a person that says, what is the issue, what is the problem? I don't know everything about, I don't know every chapter, line, and verse of the charter or the Constitution. But let's figure out what the issue is. There might be a simple solution, or it might take more detail. It might take, either referring to town council, or maybe just looking up information with the MMA. Or maybe I get on the phone and I call one of my colleagues from an area town. Have you dealt with this issue before? I used to work with Tom Moses. He's over in Hudson. I know Tim Bragan from Harvard very well. Selena Shaw, I spoke with her about Boxborough. So having that network of folks to call is another option. But again, getting back to the basics, what is the issue? Talking to people, being approachable, helping them to understand, hearing them out and listening to them is a key to getting to the bottom, because you don't want to go down a path trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. To sit down with someone and to talk to them and to understand them and to listen is really the first step of understanding before you can then sort of take out all the tools and show people how smart you are. Talking to people, building relationships is the core of dealing with any problem that I found, in this line of work, but in life in general. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, it's a combination. There's no one simple formula, but, you use your expertise, you use information, you use your networks, and you use your colleagues. And then, of course, if things, sometimes things have to get to the board's level, because there isn't any deciding information to make a decision that people will feel that there was a fair process. And that's where, allowing the board to hear the issues and to facilitate a discussion about a policy that might not be clear. That's the opportunity for the board to say, maybe we do need a policy because this is the second or third time that this issue has come up. How would we go about doing this? Maybe it's a policy decision, or maybe it's, maybe we need to change the personnel bylaw. Maybe we need to change the charter, and how do we do that? So there's an escalation manual, if you will, that you sort of have in your head as a manager, and after 30 years, there's a few different ways of going about it.
Mr. Burke?
Topsfield has a regional school district, or is part of a regional school district like we do have here.
Mm-hmm.
Then, other than the town fair, how is Topsfield similar and dissimilar to Stow?
Oh gosh, there's so many similarities in terms of demographics, in terms of, just even the population is, it's about 600 fewer. The budget size is pretty much the same. It's about the same in terms of the budget breakdown. More than 2/3 of the budget in Topsfield, went to schools. And we have both a regional school with the junior and senior high school, but then there's also, it's not considered regional, but it's a central administration of the elementary school. So from pre-K up to the fourth grade, we actually have a school committee that oversees 2 different schools. So that's a slightly different variation, but for the most part, the Masco school system is the regional go-to, and all the children from the various elementary schools feed right into Masco. In terms of similarities, population, demographics, EQV, even maybe your average tax bills are lower here than Topsfield, but there are a lot of the same issues. One in particular that I think of is water quality. Topsfield just built a water treatment plant. I'm not saying that that's where you're going, but I can say that a lot of the PFAS issues that you're dealing with, once they started in Topsfield, and as a result of that, half of the town went to a public water system, the other half stayed on wells. And since then, though, it's been a reality that the town had to find some way to deal with the issue. In most cases of, we're dealing with a lot of issues regarding the, I'm sorry, I just had I'm sorry, my brain just froze up. There's one particular, okay, this is the best way to say it, is when you can't wash your t-shirts in water. Your white t-shirts cannot be washed in the water because they'll come out orange. The water.
Iron?
No, it was, manganese. And manganese.
Yeah.
So the manganese content was really escalating. We were sort of forced into dealing with that issue with numerous mandates. And then eventually it made economic sense to go with a water treatment plant. So that was about a $10 million project. The town just finished that last year. It was sort of the tsunami of capital projects. The other similarity, Town Hall. We just renovated Town Hall in Topsfield. It was a complete renovation, but also an addition. Clearly you don't need an addition, but in terms of the renovation itself, our project was about $9.8 million. Doing that project was it was a big challenge. For years, there's been over 3 or 4 different town hall building committee set up over the time, and fortunately they were able to successfully renovate the building. Now, while they were renovating the building, I was serving as a CPO. I was as the as a town administrator, helping to navigate the process, make that as smooth as possible. And so there's some issues like the water quality, the town hall, school infrastructure, school repairs. That was also one of the similarities. In terms of the school repairs, how do you pay for those? How do you pay for, the debt included on that? How do you build that debt into your capital building schedule? So there's a lot of similarities. I consider that to sort of have been a wonderful training ground, if you would, for coming to Stow. Except
Does Topsfield have a public water supply or sewer?
they don't have any sewer. They do have, half of the town was public water.
Have public water.
Right.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm not gonna overstep. Mr. Ryan?
What do you understand the relationship between the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen? Specifically, let's say, you're working through some issues, personnel issues, and I wandered into your office and demanded to insert myself into the process as an individual member of the Board of Selectmen. How are you gonna deal with me?
That's a great question. Well, I think that fundamentally the board as a board does in this case, and needs to, any future member needs to understand that they are a collective, that you are one of 5. You are not individually given the legal authority to do anything by yourself without a vote of the entire board. So that key understanding is really important, because it not only helps you in the town, well, it helps you too as well, because when you're in the grocery store and someone's asking for something that requires a vote of the board, you know that you can't promise anything without being a part of a process, that there's a process that's in place that allows the town to be governed appropriately, that allows for a check and a balance. The relationship between the town administrator and the board, your policy setting board, as a town administrator, your role and the role of the department heads is to implement that policy, to make that policy happen. And the strength of the board is that as 5 members, that you are making those decisions based on the reality of, feedback from the town members, but also in the best interests of the town. And sometimes the best interests of the town, and it's not to say that one person, one concerned citizen is wrong, or that, that their idea isn't good. But when you hold that up against the best interests of the town, there may be a different decision, and that's the importance of having a process and a policy by which a concern can be brought to the board through the public. They can come to a meeting, they can ask to be put on an agenda to discuss the issue, and the board can collectively decide that, because you've been elected by the people of this town to represent the best interests of the town. So the relationship between the two, policy, implementation.
So, if I insisted on continuing it, nope, I'm not gonna accept that, what are you gonna do with me?
Well, first, I think it's important that every person, whether you're on the Board of Selectmen or not, have the opportunity to have an open door with the town administrator. Talk about what your issue is, what the potential solutions are. So when you have that understanding, and people understand that it's not a simple yes or no, that it's not about, the buck doesn't stop with me. The buck stops with you all, with the town, with the selectmen in terms of collective decision-making. It does stop, well, I shouldn't say that, because the buck does stop with the town administrator when you're responsible for putting together the budget. In that particular case, what I would be recommending is that one member of the board, I would refer them to the chairman. I would also give the chairman a heads up. I would say, Brian's having an issue with this. I'm going to recommend that he talk with you to decide the best course of action. One member of the board speaking with the chairman is perfectly, there's no issue of open meeting law there. And I think good communication is key. So you want to hope that you can alleviate the need to escalate issues to that point. And part of the way you do that also is by building respect of the board with each other and also with the town administrator, having open and clear lines of communication while also acknowledging that there are laws in place for a purpose and that you don't ever want to, circumvent them with your communication technique. But I think that understanding that there is a protocol and that the chairman of the board is the person, if you are an individual on the board that has an issue or a problem, that it would also start with the chairman, because it's important that the chairman understand what some of the issues are and help the town administrator navigate those things through, but also have the board navigate those things. So I think it's important to have open lines of communication and to have the board understand from the very beginning of the process that the chairman should be their go-to person if there's an issue with me, with the town administrator. The chairman should be, is voted to be the select board's main person of contact. And I mean, I guess that's how I would deal with that, is to really involve the chairman and see if there's some way we could work it through.
I want to ask a follow-up on that, but then I want to ask something completely separate. So the follow-up on that one is,
Who said you can have two questions?
thank you, I did, Chair.
He's the chairman.
You just heard her say.
Didn't we just say that?
Contacted the town.
All right.
Now I forget what, okay. On the meddling selectmen topic, which is not a problem currently.
Yeah.
Not really, but is always a perpetually theoretical
Mhm.
problem. More likely, the meddling selectman is going to approach a department head rather than the TA. So along the lines that Tom just asked, what message would you send to the police chief, fire chief, highway supervisor about the potential for the meddling selectman?
Well, I think that gets back to the protocol as well. Your department heads need to understand sort of the protocol and the escalation of communication. You certainly don't want to box off your department heads. You want them to know that, anyone can ask a question of them and they should be able to answer it truthfully. But in the case of that we're speaking of, I would be expecting and sort of have clear-cut communication protocols with them that they should be involving me with that type of communication. And in some cases, just like as a town administrator, being a part of the MMA and the ICMA, we have a professional code of conduct which allows you and says basically that, if you get a call from a selectman from another community, it's professional courtesy to contact the other town administrator. And we do that out of respect and also out of good communication and continuity. The same is with your department heads. When a selectman is asking a question of a department head, it's important that the town administrator's relationship with the department head is one that the department head can get on the phone and be like, Jim was just in here asking me for this. Sometimes that's a tip-off that, okay, maybe there's two things. Maybe there's something that I'm not aware of that Jim, wants information on, and we should be providing that to him. But we should be providing it to the entire board, so it's important that I know sort of what the issue is. And that's not to the point of being a micromanager, that's very different. But also sometimes it's a clue to the manager that, maybe there's an issue stirring up that requires more information and more feedback and maybe an item added to the next agenda. So in my opinion and in my experience, being a good manager includes allowing your department heads the flexibility to answer questions without fear of getting in trouble for speaking out of turn, but more the opportunity for them to know that we have a job to do, we need to do it, and we want to be polite and courteous, we want to answer questions. However, that there is a line of, that there is protocol, and that those questions and answers I should be aware of them. You don't want me to be surprised or the town administrator to be surprised. More importantly, you don't want the other members of the board to be surprised. Because if one member is going to one department head and getting information that the rest aren't, that could make for a very sticky situation as you go down the path of making policy decisions, and everyone has to have equal information and equal access. And so I think it's a good role for the town administrator to have, that the department heads understand the communication protocol and when they should be letting the manager know what the issue is that they've been approached about.
So perhaps along those lines, the municipal side of our government, I mean, to distinguish the regional school, a lot of independent, well, a lot of other boards, some are separately elected, some are ultimately appointed by us, and they have staff. But you've read our charter, you can tell the TA is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. Talk to me a little bit about your understanding of the extent of your authority over staff that report to another board, the limits on that authority, and maybe your philosophy on that whole thing.
That's a really good question, because you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you're not very clear. When you asked that question, I sort of pictured in my mind the first time I started in Topsfield, and I went to the water board meeting, the water commissioners, and there's a very strong chair, and they're separately elected board, and they meet at like 7 in the morning on Wednesdays. And so I went to the meeting just to introduce myself and to say hello and to observe, and he's a wonderful man. This isn't meant to be critical, but it was just an interesting observation when I got there, and he stopped the meeting and he said, I just want to let you know that he, meaning the superintendent, doesn't report to you. He reports to us. And I said, that is perfect. I'm just here to say hello and to introduce myself and to hear what's going on at your meeting. That is perfectly fine. So in a very visceral way, he let me know that they were a separately elected board, and that whatever I was going to say or to do was by no means going to be, a militaristic command structure that involved any part of his superintendent. So so that was very common. It's very vertical organization, lots of independent. There was a water, roads, cemetery commission, all had independently elected boards. Of course, you've got your library board of trustees, you've got the school committee, you've got, your board of health. All of these committees, I guess what it sort of forces you to do, and in my case it was intrinsic. I am a team builder. I like to connect with people. I like to communicate, build relationships. I am not a command structure person. I don't give orders. I want to be a leader. I have to manage projects, but I want to lead people. I want to set an example. I want to work with all different members. I know who is in my direct supervisory authority and who isn't. And sometimes that's made very clear, and other times it's very ambiguous. But in this line of work, you need to be able to build teams, cross-functional or otherwise, and that's what we were able to do in Topsfield. I was only the second town administrator, although I know that you were too.
First.
You're the first.
I'm the first.
Okay, well, I used to say, well, I was only the second, thinking, well, the first town administrator was there for 6 years. But everybody was kicking and screaming to change to a town administrator form of government in Topsfield. And this isn't unheard of with many small towns. And here, you have the opposite. You're sort of at the opposite end of the development spectrum in terms of town governance. In my case, there was a lot of ambiguity. So I had to work very prudently on building relationships, going to those meetings, introducing myself to people so that they knew that I wasn't the type of person who was going to come in and try to fix things that weren't broken. I was there to be support. I was there to, to help deal with, issues that popped up. I was there to help guide people through the warrant process, through town meeting. The water treatment plant took a long time for that to pass. And then my first year there, they introduced it, and after months and months of preparation, one person stood up and they said, we don't need a water treatment plant. For $20, you can go and get this water, thing, you just put it on your faucet. And that's gonna take, why do we need to spend money on a water treatment plant? So in that one statement, the whole, project just sort of withered away. So after seeing that, the next year, the next town meeting, I had said, have you considered, what's the approach? How are you gonna do this? Is there something I can offer you to help make this an easier, people clearly don't understand the issues, what needs to happen. And I just wanna help you to make this work. And the next time they went up, it did. And part of the reasoning, or part of they worked very hard on getting out more public information, answering those questions. But the other part was the financing part. How are we gonna pay for it? How is it gonna be paid for? How many years are we gonna bond this for? How much will it impact the water rate payer? Will it impact all the taxpayers? No, not necessarily, not if you're not getting water from the public water. So to answer your question, it's about building relationships with those boards, with those people, and allowing them to see you as the resource, as the person who can help them to weather the storm, can assist with giving them the resources they need, but also calling together a collective team, cross-functional teams, having communications. I had all of the department heads, whether they reported to me or not. We met at least once a month, usually more frequently. I would have weekly meetings with all of my direct staff for finance. We'd have bi-weekly meetings with all the department heads across the board. So, and that was important to have those, not because we expected to give out orders and have them obey. It was about communicating and understanding each other's needs and having everyone think about the other departments that are also within the town, and understanding that what one does here doesn't necessarily, that it will impact some other part of the town. So building those relationships and allowing them to know that I'm here not to make their jobs more difficult, it's to make them easier, because to understand what they're doing, they're delivering services, and when they look good, when we look good, we all look good, we're all in this together. So I hope that I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Bill?
As it relates to personnel, specifically labor unions, can you just, with a little specificity, describe the nature of your role and involvement in collective bargaining, contract negotiations, grievance management, everything related to,
Okay.
because as you know, it's a very difficult, sensitive aspect, but there's probably nothing more important, in my opinion, than managing personnel today,
Right.
particularly starting with the unions.
Right. Well, yes, all of the above. I have, from nuts and bolts, back to the beginning of, I've done a number, I did at least 2 rounds of collective bargaining agreement in Topsfield. The first round, I was assisted by a member of the Board of Selectmen, mostly because I was new to the role, and it was really the first time that the town had done any negotiations without a selectman being in the room for every single round of negotiations. So they would have liaisons, and the liaison would sit in on the negotiations. But this was the first year that they had decided.
That's mine,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to know what it was. I thought the circus was passing outside. Sorry. That was-
It could have been, we weren't in it.
The
We'd be
whole
serious
room
here.
starts ringing.
I didn't bring it up.
But it didn't take long after that first round of negotiations to really, by the second round, I was doing the negotiations myself, everything from prepping, doing the preparation, reviewing all the contracts, looking through any prior year grievances, looking through the issues that had been brought to the town administrator as personnel director. In addition to doing collective bargaining, though, we also did, at least 2 rounds of negotiations, concerning the health insurance rates. So with that negotiation as well, we had representatives from each of the groups come together. We had a member of ASME representative and an MTA representative meet with us. We were able to do 2 rounds of negotiations that effectively have saved millions of dollars in health insurance. Because when I got to Topsfield, they had the richest plan, no deductibles, no co-pays. And so what we realized is that the first round was voluntary. Everybody knew that we all had some skin in the game, and if we didn't get together soon and make some changes, that the GIC was going to be the way the town was going to go, and people didn't feel good about that. So we used that opportunity to bring people to the table. We used that to explain how they could save money, and then the town could save money, so that we could also have some savings to use for COLAs and other collective bargaining needs. So that's just an example of outside of negotiations. Within negotiations, I was responsible for doing everything from setting up the meetings to, and I would never have any labor council. What we did is we had KP Law, that was the town council, and town council, I would call labor council, Attorney Jenkins, I would call him, and I'd sort of lay out a plan up front, say this is what we're thinking, this is what we need to do. We started with the Quinn bill. We had the Quinn bill in our police contract. We were able to negotiate that out. We were able to make the health insurance plan design changes within the language of the contracts. We were able to take that out. There were some really significant things that we were able to do during that process. There were probably at least 3 members of each collective bargaining unit at each meeting with their representative. It was mostly just me. Doing the bargaining after the session, I would touch base with the board, I would give them an update, I would talk with town council. So I would use all of those pieces to sort of guide the process. We were very successful. Part of my success, I think, is allowing there to be, first of all, to have a relationship with folks outside of so before we had to sit down at the table, is going around, going to the fire station, going to the police station. I did ride-alongs with the police. I, did a shift with the fire station, going to the COA picnic, talking with folks and letting employees know that what they do is important and that what they do is critical for people of the community to see them and to respect what they do and how they do it, and that I was one of those people, that we deliver services as a municipality. So before you get to the room and you're at the table, you want to establish a sense of respect for their position, who they are, and what they bring to the table. It also makes it easier to say no when you know what some of their issues are. What some of the legitimate issues that they were dealing with, health and safety issues. Being at the table not only helped with negotiations, but it also helped outside. Because when we went to town meeting, and I would hear at the table that they had issues not having enough, that the water rescue boat was a rowboat that was donated to the town 30 years ago by some very fabulous, generous person. And then it took a table discussion for me to understand. I said, you're asking for capital expenditure of $20,000 for a boat, for a rescue boat. I said, tell me about that. Do you need a boat? And they said, well, to be honest with you, that rowboat weighs, 100 pounds, and to get it into the water, down the riverbank into the water, it's a lot of effort. So yes, we do need a rowboat. We need one that's lightweight. We need one of the newer ones that's for sale, and it would make our lives so much easier. And by the way, if we're lugging that boat down the riverbank and get hurt, that's going to cost the town more money too with a workers' comp claim. So, being at the table, I saw it sort of as it was a responsibility, of course, and you can't give away the store. There aren't enough resources. But it was also an opportunity to get to know the folks better, to understand their working conditions, and to help find some common issues that you could both try to resolve, issues that might cost a little bit money up front, but that could have some bigger dollar savings down the road. And in this case, we're talking about the boat's just a small example. I found out that the Jaws of Life were completely outdated, that, so it was a great opportunity to hear from their perspective what their needs were, aside from how much we paid, what's the COLA, and can we get a raise? It turned into, how can we make this better? And that was also a reflection of the great employees that were working in Topsfield. And I get the sense that you have you have a lot of great employees working here in the town as well. To build those relationships and to help them understand we all have a job to do. We have to deliver services, but we need to do it within a limited budget. So I hope I've answered your question.
Ms. Frazier?
How do you balance the desire for results with a collaborative process that brings everyone along? So you've just been talking about getting to know people and finding a way to have common ground and work together. What do you do? Well, you also talked a little bit about the meddler. What happens when you need to disagree strongly with the Board of Selectmen, or you make a decision that is not popular and you need to just be with the people around that?
I'm not sure if I got the complete. So, if I understand it correctly, what happens when you have disagreement and how you sort of work through that?
Well, how can you balance getting results with
Balancing.
collaboration?
Okay, well, I think in many respects they work together. Getting collaboration, again, with the theme that I've always had through my career, not just for today's conversation, but to get collaboration and cooperation requires mutual respect, but relies on communication, regular communication, and you can get to those places by allowing, first, there's two tiers. One is the process. I like to think that one of the secrets of my success thus far has been utilizing the process in such a way that it helps to complement your non-official or unofficial communication style as a manager. So using the process, and what I mean by that is, the process is, if a department head would like to deal with a policy issue, they need to explain what the issue is, and whether that's through a roundtable discussion about, what are the priorities for next year's budget? What do you need? What's gonna make your department run smoother? What helps you to deliver services faster, more efficiently? What is that need? That's a discussion, but when you use the process, you're able to take that discussion and highlight the issue or the challenge or the need to identify that, and you use the process to then move it forward. So, if you're having a discussion about how the rowboat weighs 100 pounds and is 40 years old and needs to be replaced, you can complain about that at the table and we can feel your pain. But if the conversation ends there, you haven't affected your you haven't helped to fulfill your objective, which is to get emergency rescue services to the Ipswich River in an efficient amount of time. So you use the process then to say, at the next meeting, how about we have the fire chief come to the Board of Selectmen? We're going to, request of the board that they do a section where we can talk about priorities of public safety. We'll have the police chief, the fire chief, we'll have you come to a meeting, we'll do a presentation, or we can just talk about some of the issues before you get into the zero-sum game of budgeting, right? Talk about the bigger picture. Use the process to get an item on the agenda, to get the airways, to get people at home understanding that why we need a boat. It's not just we're asking for 20 grand and, the fire department just wants all this big equipment so that they can feel important. No, it's not about that. Our fire department chief, and I'm proud to say I was very involved with her hiring. She's, I think, the 4th female fire chief in the state. She's great, and I've worked with her to help work through some of these scenarios, and our police chief, who is wonderful. Let's go to the table, let's open up the process, let's have a discussion with the selectmen. Because if we have that discussion with the selectmen during the process, we can have an outcome that can then maybe make it to the open town meeting warrant, so that we can then allocate funding through the capital budget committee to get that vote. So I keep falling on the vote. But it's just a really good example. So you use the policy, use the process to get to the end result, which is, okay, we got the $20,000 allocated. Now, in Topsfield, similar to here, you don't, the first step is the selectmen. The next step, and that was a pretty big hurdle, because some of the selectmen didn't like to spend, well, didn't wanna
One
spend
more dime.
$20,000 on a boat. And rightly so, rightly, wrongly. And so then you had to go to the FinCom, and you couldn't just go to one meeting, you had to go to all of them. Because one of those meetings, they used to meet weekly, at any one of those meetings, somebody could speak up and say, what do we need a darn boat for? Nobody, how many drownings have we had? What, 1 in 10 years? That would sound ridiculous to some, but to other people would say, that's kind of a good point. $20,000 for one? What you need to do is use the process, and in this case, it was going to the finance committee and saying to your department head, it's not about me selling this boat. You need to sell the boat, because I don't know that boat from a fishing boat, but you know that it could save someone's life. I need you to go to the FinCom, they're gonna have it on their agenda, they're gonna put it on their meeting, I'm gonna put it on the list of capital requests. It's up to you to go there to sell that, and when they ask you those questions, you need to be able to answer them. If you haven't thought through how we're gonna pay for it, where are we getting the money, we can talk about that, there are some options. But you need to sell this, this is your department, this is your objective, I'm here to help you and assist you, using the process. But also that communication, getting back to the cross-functional teams, having different members of all departments, regardless of who you report to and who signs your paycheck. Getting them at the table, starting the conversation, building the relationships, using the process to get to the end result.
Got it.
Otherwise, you're just complaining. And that doesn't solve anything if you can't get to an end result that's gonna help.
Thank you.
Mr. Burke?
I've been very impressed by the way you've answered our questions here today, and just as an aside, I don't think you have to worry as much as you might think from the number of questions about meddling select people.
Yes.
No.
I'm afraid we're giving the wrong impression.
Yeah, I cleared that up. My question isn't about any of that. My question is about your 30-year career. Your resume shows a very also impressive array of educational degrees, some impressive certificates and awards, and I can see a very thought-out career trajectory over this 30 years. You've been building a career arc that's leading somewhere. But my question is, I'm not sure that I see how coming to Stow is the next step in this very deliberate and thought-out career arc.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we're a step down, believe me. But what I am saying is, it doesn't fit within the trajectory that I've seen you plot out for yourself. Am I right? Am I wrong?
No, you're right in wondering that. You're definitely right in wondering that, but I'm here to tell you that I feel that this 30-year career has led me to this seat right now. That I've never felt more prepared or ready for a career challenge than I am now. And in the best case scenario is that I'm selected for this position, and that I am sitting in that chair 15 years from now trying to help you pick your next town administrator. This is a huge leap forward for me in terms of the fact that I've spent 6 years in Topsfield. Before that, for 9 months, I was the interim town administrator in Belmont.
Yep.
So as the assistant in Belmont, I said, oh, I would never want that job. You know, all the luck to you, Bill. I don't know how you can do it 24/7. You know, you got the finance committee, you got the board of selectmen, you have, you know, all these residents always, you know, tugging at your sleeve. I don't know how you could do it. And then for 9 months in Belmont, I was given, and I was publicly given sort of, you know, the reign, and by someone who I respected very much. He was, Rich Kelleher was the longtime town administrator for the town of Brookline. And for about 2 months, Belmont brought in Mr. Kelleher to be the interim town administrator. And at the end of those, at the end of a week, he said, I don't know why they need me here. You're doing a great job. You know, you're doing a fabulous job. And so 6 weeks later, he resigned from that position, and he said, Kelly can do this. She's doing it already, and she's doing it without backfilling her old position. You already have someone here to do the job. And so to hear that from someone who was completely objective, who had seen my skills, it sort of brought myself to another level. Now, mind you, it was a different period on my family trajectory, if you will. But when he said that, and when I did that job for 9 months, and I realized, you know what, we can do some really good things. And then, you know, they appointed the new town administrator in Belmont, and I worked to help onboard him and to help him to get to know the department heads. At the end of that period, I realized that there are a lot of things that were still yet to be done that I hadn't considered doing before then. I threw my name in the hat for Topsfield. It was my first town administrator position. And in 6 years, we've accomplished a lot. We accomplished a lot. Now, at some point, I felt that it wasn't a good fit. But I think that I've alluded to some of the reasons why I think that this town of Stow provides the fact that you have a charter, you have your strong AAA bond rating. I mean, we just got a AAA bond rating in Topsfield. I mean, it was a long path to get there, but when we got a AAA bond rating and finished that town hall and then finished the water treatment plant, finished the 2 schools with the MSBA project, I thought, wow, we've done some amazing things, and if we can do this in 6 years in a small town, who knows what else could be out there as my next step. And so I haven't been working in Topsfield since July. However, I've spent the last few months sort of just reassessing, a lot of personal thought into what is my next career move. And when Stow's position came up, I thought, what better way, and did some research and watched some meetings, read the charter, and had talked to some folks. I talked with Orlando from Lancaster and Dawn from Bolton. They all had great things to say about the town, and that represents what I don't need a job, I don't need to come to Stow, but I want to. I think it's a great town, it's beautiful, I think the people here are very respectful, and I think they recognize when good work is being done. I have witnessed many in all of the meetings I've been seeing, I've recognized that people are really grateful and thoughtful and feel that they are living in a great town, and they want to be a part of it, which is why people are volunteering to run for selectmen and other positions. So this, to me, could be the culmination of my career, and I don't have any thoughts about going anywhere else anytime soon. I think it would be wonderful. It's a half an hour from my house. Topsfield was an hour-long commute, and this to me just seems like this is the right place to be right now for me. And I hope that the way I've answered your questions helps you to feel like this is the right time for me in a town like Stow. Just very thrilled to be here and excited about the potential opportunity.
So I think I need to let you ask us some questions at this point, because we're less than 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Sorry to cut it off right then, Mr. Ryan.
I'm used to it.
I am, before you do that.
If you have another question, I don't have many questions. I've done a lot of research, so I feel like, if anything, I'd rather use the time. There's another question that you wanted to ask.
No, No, I was just joking.
Okay. Well then, may I take advantage of that
Of course.
offer? I've got
That was smooth.
a few. Please expand a little bit more on your reasons for leaving Topsfield. You just said you felt like it was not a good fit. Give me
Mhm.
more detail on that. Then I wanna go back, so I'll just ask these together. More about the relationship between town administrator and the board of selectmen in Stow. You seem to be suggesting before that when you had a problem, when you had disagreement with the department head about a budget figure, you would bring that to the board.
Oh,
And if you could just explain that.
sure, yes, if I said that, I misspoke. When a department head has an issue with any budget number or any issue at all, I would expect that they would be discussing that with me. They would not be going to the Board of Selectmen. That is not the Board of Selectmen's role at all. It's my role to manage and to communicate with all of the department heads, that there should be, ideally, there should be a line of communication and a protocol that allows department heads to report up to the town administrator, so that that communication is very clear and is directed to the town administrator. That the town administrator has a responsibility to do the budget, to work on the budget, to make recommendations of the budget to the Board of Selectmen. So if I said that, I apologize, I
Okay,
was
that's
misleading.
fine. Got it.
When I left Topsfield, at some point it just didn't feel like the right fit for me. Some of the, and they're not, issues makes it sound negative, in every community they have their own sort of sense of what their governance is and how they like to run things. Having a town administrative form of government was new for Topsfield. And it was an adjustment for some of the residents and also at least one or more of the selectmen. My goals, my willingness to make good things happen, sort of faced a little bit of resistance. But in the end, we were able to work together to still accomplish some great things. They don't have a very structured town governance model. There's no charter. And I think the fact that Stow does have those things makes it very clear to me that some of the confusion or ambiguity that might have existed in Topsfield wouldn't be the case here. That the groundwork and the fundamentals have been built within that charter. And that leaves you more time to do the problem solving, to do the communication, to talk with department heads, to talk to residents, to get out into the community and to find out what people want, what they like, what they want more of. The community center, I would love to just be able to go there and do a coffee talk with, some of the folks from the COA. Those are the things that communities really should be spending their time with. How do you make this community better and stronger? And I'm not thinking that I can come in and fix what isn't broken. You guys are doing wonderfully. You got your AAA bond rating. Bill has done a fabulous job, helping to, manage the town, make sure that services are delivered. I think you've got a great foundation and footprint for future success, and I think that you can only build upon that, and that's why I'm here, and not in Topsfield, but, different, it just wasn't a good fit, and in this line of work, that happens. And I, have no regrets whatsoever. My time in Topsfield was wonderful, and I think that what I learned there can only help in Stow. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you. I want to ask Mr. Ryan, we only literally have 2 minutes. Would you like to ask a question, or do you want to give Mr. Wrigley one more?
I'll give it to Bill.
One more question? So you can ask,
I
you guys in 2
can
minutes?
ask it, I'm certainly can be explained in.
2 minutes, well, this is.
Well, rough, we go over a little bit.
Yeah, so with respect to the budget, and you've seen the budget document
Mhm.
that I have, and we've had some discussions about structural impediments. On the revenue side, where I think the biggest challenge over time for Stow to continue to be able to provide expanding services, or at least maintain the high level of existing services, is gonna take some imagination, because it's a revenue-driven process, and you've seen what we've got. It's undiversified and unexpanded. Any thoughts on the future with respect to providing some relief on the revenue side?
I think the fact that you have, I mean, the new growth number, even though it, for 21, showed a steep decline, I think it's important for folks to remember that you want to be conservative with your new growth number. Last year, there was approximately more than 800,000 in new growth. You need to be looking at the plan moving forward. You need to be able to find the balance between getting a healthy new growth number in your budget so that you can continue to grow and support services. You also need to balance that with the town's character. It's a very rural town. People don't want, a big box store in the middle of Stow. That's not what Stow's about. However, there may be other ways, other smaller ways to enhance economic development efforts that are not in competition, but that could be seen as a positive for Stow. Maybe there's a need for a small coffee shop somewhere, or the development, I think, is it the lower, what's?
Lower Village.
Lower Village, sounds like there's a lot of activity there. With every town, you wanna be able to balance the need for new growth with what the town really wants. I mean, the town really is your quintessential small town. Everybody, it's just a beautiful place to live and to work. Well, in this case, you're not really working. I would say that, maybe people don't move to Stow because they wanna see an industrial park at the end of their road. There are other ways to go about economic development without giving up the rural character that everyone loves about the town. I think this whole pandemic has opened people's eyes to thinking outside of the box. What other ways can we do good things? Can we make good things happen with limited resources? That's the balance, that's the challenge with every local government. So it's not unique to Stow, but I got to tell you, 350,000 in new growth is pretty significant. I know in Topsfield, we were looking at 50,000 because a lot of the development had sort of peaked. And then there was no new space for discussion about it. You're in a position where there's room for discussion. You've got a CPA, we didn't have that in Topsfield. Gives you a lot of ways to invest and to purchase maybe property parcels that you may, actually in Topsfield, we were able to secure open space at the same time they were trying to foster some development in the downtown. So I think there's a way to balance it, but you do need to have, a proactive Board of Selectmen and other committees talking about ways that you can build growth without undermining the real character of the town. It's always a balancing act, but.
Agreed.
Questions from you? Last year, anything?
I just have one very quick question, and I'm just wondering and I believe the plan for the process is to deliberate on Tuesday at your next meeting?
Yes, I'm sorry. So the plan, I wanna go back, I have one question before I talk about that, but I'll answer you first. The plan is to deliberate at our next business meeting, right, which is Tuesday.
Okay.
Probably vote, unless there are four of us, and possibility of a tie, but I think more likely, whether we want a second round of interviews or something like that. We have already done query checks. Whoever we decide to enter into negotiations with, we'll do a more extensive background check, all public records.
Yep.
But we're not gonna do that on people we're not negotiating with. I think that's about it.
Okay.
And then, Bill's contract expires at the end of August. May I go back and ask one question?
Absolutely.
You said you had binge watched our meetings, which sounds painful, but,
Yeah. I did other things too.
Any, how are they similar or different than Topsfield? Any observations that you'd care to share?
You know what, my family thinks I'm nuts when I watch these meetings. They're like, really, Mom? And I say, fine, I'll watch it on my iPad and go upstairs. You can watch the TV. You know what, they're all, at the end of the day, they're all pretty much the same, you know. It's very rudimentary and very, motion, motion by, seconded by. So it can be very boring to most people in the outside world. I find it fascinating that I can think of one, can't tell you exactly which one it was, but where there was a difference of opinion on, I think you were talking about alcohol in public buildings.
Yes.
And we were having the same discussion, the same exact discussion in Topsfield about this time last year before the town hall was finished. And I stepped away from that thinking, I'm really impressed that you could agree to disagree. That it was very clear that there were some difficult decisions, or some people were entrenched, other people were on the line. But that it was a very civil discussion. Everybody had the opportunity to say what they wanted to say. That was one meeting I remember. The other meeting, and I remember,
Ms. Fraser.
there was someone in the audience who kept trying to voice their opposition to something. And I just remember Ms. Fraser coming and saying, I just need to let you know that we do hear people. We do want to hear your feedback. That's what we're here for. This is why we're here, is to hear your feedback. And we have heard your feedback, and we will take that under consideration. And basically, at the end of the day, we're gonna make the right decision based on the discussion of the board, and that this isn't the end of the process. That the process needs time to unveil itself. That we will have further discussion. But you were able to acknowledge the need for someone to speak, but also acknowledge and sort of defend the board, that we're here to listen, that's why we're here. So, and when people, somewhat suggest that you're not willing to, that you were able to come to the defense of the board, but not seem too defensive, that it was very cordial and civil, and the person sat back down and they understood that there was another part to this process. So I was just very, what's the right word? I guess I was just very happy to see a cordial, civil, public meeting, especially in these times of such civil distress, because, there's can be a lot of nasty things being said, but I didn't get the sense at all from any of those meetings. I saw the meeting where you were commending the police chief when he was leaving, the former police chief when he was leaving, and the gratitude for his service. Even, I think there was someone in the highway department, and you were thanking him for his service. And every time Bill talks about leaving, there's always like a long discussion about how great he is and wonderful and how we're gonna miss him.
That cost me money.
I bet.
He's
So,
gonna
no, I was
continue.
very impressed, very
Not
impressed.
enough.
Bill has got
Definitely.
a preview of the going away speeches at his party, so.
We're not having a party, are we?
Oh, that's right, yeah, we ought to think about that. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
One last question, if you don't mind, is after the grilling we've given you and all of this stuff, obviously subject to negotiations, if you were offered the job, would you, are you still interested in it?
Absolutely. I thought, okay, perfect way to end this. What I was thinking about was this could be the perfect onboarding experience, is that I'm currently only working part-time, but yet, so at first I was a little alarmed at the long length of time, but then I understood with the charter how long the process has taken and why. And, but it could be a great opportunity, because I could, someone asked at the screening committee, what would your first 100-day plan look like? And I thought, my 100 days would start, when I was on payroll. The 100 days would start when I knew that the job, was going to be mine, that it allows me the opportunity to come in, to visit the COA, to go to some meetings, to, whether it's on Zoom or go to the meetings or go to an activity at the COA, or come in and talk to Bill about, and maybe go around and introduce myself to folks. So I thought that it would be a wonderful opportunity, since I am out of work, that I would be able to, sort of hit the ground running when Bill decides to take a little bit of a break. I should tell you too, the one question that I did have for you that I was going to ask, and I don't think I need to, but what would be the biggest challenge for the next town administrator? But I think I already know the answer. He's sitting right there. Those
saying
big
he's
shoes to
challenging?
fill. No. Well, I don't know about that, but Bill's shoes will be very big ones to fill.
We gotta keep this relatively.
I think Mr. Burke's right. We're at the point where it might almost be unfair to
I'm,
but
thank you so
Thank you,
much for
Kelly.
having me.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
very much
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Terrific.
I'd shake your hand if I could.
Yes.
Same
Yeah.
here.
But I will get up.
There's nowhere to go but up, and hopefully someday I will be able to shake your hand.
Mhm.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you.
Stow
Thank
TV will be
you.
taking a break till about 1. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much. It was great to meet you all.
Everything nice to meet you. Members of the board, Tom Garino, Bill Wrigley.
Hi.
I left my mask in the car. I have 4 of them.
Quite all right.
That's your seat
Now, that
there.
excuse didn't work for me a minute ago. They pulled out an extra one.
He can sell you one.
And we're now unmuted.
Thank you for the water.
You're welcome. Let me introduce the selectman, Courtney Frecia,
How do you do?
Brian Burke,
We can't shake hands.
I know, I understand.
already got up.
Tom Ryan, I'm Jim Salvi, I'm the chair, and Bill Wrigley, town administrator. Have a seat, make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
We've, as a test of character, we put the brownies right in front of you.
Well, as I told you when you were at the car, that I'm kind of saving myself for Erickson's.
Yes.
Good choice.
So, the way we're doing this, we're being broadcast live on Stow TV and recorded, and we're gonna Zoom, and, so you can be seen by people zooming in. Well, is that too distracting for you?
No, no, it's fine. It's fine.
You sure?
Yep.
I can move it over here a little bit so you can see me. Is it better or worse?
That's fine.
Okay.
It's all good.
All right, Tom, thank you so much for making the time for this and coming down here. Where in Vermont do you live?
I live as far south in Vermont as you can possibly get. I'm in Vernon,
Okay.
which is southeast of Brattleboro.
Huh.
I'm on the Northfield, Mass, and Bernardston, Mass border.
We used to camp on
Nice
the upper
neighborhood.
island just past of the island on the Connecticut, just south of the Vernon Power Plant.
Okay.
I lived in Greenfield for a
Well, I
period of time.
grew up in Greenfield.
Oh, you
so,
did?
Yeah.
I was on the city council there. I worked for Dufresne Heavy Engineers at one time. I
Okay.
had an office there.
Yeah.
We used to camp, we used to run the river and camp up.
Yeah. Yeah, I explained in the prior interview the reason for my staying in Vermont, even though I've been working in Massachusetts forever. And at some point, we can discuss that, but I
Yeah.
can't. I'm not-
Well, let's do this. Let me outline for you how we're gonna do this
Okay.
today. And actually, the first thing we're gonna do is gonna start with a little free time for you.
Okay.
Where you can, we've looked through your resume and everything, and you can tell us who you are, why you think you're a fit for Stow, why you're in Vermont, that's fine. We're gonna try to stick to about an hour, and we'll do questions one at a time, and we'll go in order just for convenience. So we'll start with Ms. Frecia and go down the panel.
Okay.
And we'll try to leave at least 10 minutes at the end for questions from you.
Good,
Is that
thank
okay?
you. Yeah, excellent.
So why don't we just start off with who are you and why Stow and why you in Vermont?
All right. So, thank you very much for bringing me into this round. I'm thrilled. I've spent quite a bit of time here over the last few weeks, both driving around, walking around, and meeting by telephone over the last few days with some of the department leaders to get a flavor of what's going on, especially during this COVID time, which puts a different type of pressure on all of us. I'm a Greenfield, Mass native. I'm a Pioneer Valley kid. And I was a circuit rider I won't go through the whole resume, you've read that, but I was a circuit rider. Went up to Vermont for a year, 36 years ago, and to do some economic development, to learn about economic development work. And Rockingham, Bellows Falls was doing quite a bit of that. Sat on a couple of regional development corporations, as well as becoming the town manager of that community. In 1994, I became the executive director of the Massachusetts Rural Development Council, which was a member state of 40 states at that time that were part of the National Rural Development Partnership. And I learned more on that job than I had learned in college and high school and everywhere else. I dealt with some hugely intelligent people and learned a lot about facilitation, about one size doesn't fit all, about agriculture, and not every small town is necessarily all ag, but ag can be a part of it. And if you know, one of the things I learned is if you've seen one small community, you've seen one small community. I got to travel the country with that job and learned a lot. The funding fell out of that job in 2003, 2004, and there was an interim town administrator's job in Bourne, Massachusetts. And I had 4 kids to feed at the time, and my wife says, you should apply for that, and I said, okay. And that 90 days turned into about 14 and a half years. 13 of those were just really good years, and about 18 months of those, that time was a little difficult. We agreed to part ways on an amicable basis. I just spoke with the chair of that board day before yesterday. So it was time for a change, and I think we all agreed to do that. So why Stow? I've been fairly picky about where I've applied. I've been working in Wareham doing some work for the sewer department there as a consultant. I looked at Stow. I came down and I visited Stow before I applied, before I put the first application in. And I liked it. And then I started to read up about Stow. I read a lot of minutes, I read town reports, I looked at budgets. You know, a lot of the things that I know how to do fit really well into this community, I think. I understand the agricultural and conservation importance of a town like this. I understand regional schools. I want to be able to let the employees feel good about coming to work every day. I think that's one of the things I can bring to the table. I'm not always the smartest one in the room, and I don't try to play like I'm the smartest one in the room all the time. But I can bring a lot of things to the table. I'm good with budgets. I'm really good with budgets, according to my former bosses. And I understand right now there's a lot of pressure put on communities, and I think there's going to be a lot more pressure put on regional school districts, and we don't know what's going to happen with Chapter 70. Local aid here is about a net 400,000. Not with the regional school. So if there's a 20% cut, they're talking 10 to 20%. We can probably find that. We can probably figure out a way to do that. With your tax rate being in the 20s, you don't want to be looking at unused levy capacity because you're going to bump up against that. You don't want to be doing that. But there are a number of things I think I can bring to the table.
Thank you.
Could I just add,
Yes.
where do you reside at the moment?
Right now, I reside in Vernon.
Oh, sorry, I missed it.
I don't suggest my lifestyle, my wife and my lifestyle for everyone. I will more than likely get a place down here. I think it's important that you're a member of the community. It depends how that works. I lived in Westport, Mass for 13 years, 11 years while I was in Bourne, and that was a 50-minute drive. And then I moved to Middleborough for the last couple of years. So it's not optimum for everyone. We have a child with, an adult child with some special needs, and using Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center is important to us. moving over the line makes that not as easy. We'd have to go to Boston, or we've been, so that's why. So that's the reason. I won't get into the gory details of it, but that's why.
I was going to ask that question though, so you're basically saying if you had the position, more than likely you would find a place to spend at least some of the week down here.
Yes, and
That's
and
what I'm hearing.
I just want to emphasize, if I could, Mr. Chairman, if you were to check with Bourne, I was first one in, last one out most every day.
Yep.
If there was an event, I was there. If there was an important football game, I was there. If there was a Saturday facilitation, I was there. If there was a parade, I don't think I should be there because I'm not elected, but I would be there. High school graduation, I was at the Maritime graduations and Maritime Academy. So my presence will be known every day of the week. But one of the things I do make a differentiation to is I'm not the 6th select board member. And, you know, I work for the select board. I need to be active, but I don't need to be up in the political, in the small p political realm.
Let me start up some questions, thank you. Ms. Fraser?
Yes, tell us about your management style. Are there philosophies that you operate from? And just say a little bit about how you like to do business.
I'm more horizontal than vertical, in as much as the department heads, department leaders, from that perspective, the first level, they are experts generally at what they do, and they know their jobs really well, and I try to support them. I try to give them advice if it's necessary or if it's asked for. Sometimes it's not asked for and it's necessary. But I let them do their jobs. I don't micromanage them. There may be times where I would go a week, week and a half without perhaps seeing one of them for one reason or another. I don't call department head meetings for the sake of it. I call department head meetings when I have something to go over with them. I meet with department heads individually more often than I have meetings, you know, formal meetings. With the administrative support staff and those folks and the Council on Aging and those folks, I do a considerable amount of MBWA, if you will, management by walking around. It's good to know the people that are working within this building and then in the Council on Aging over at the community building. And the rec department, I guess, shares that with them as well after 2 o'clock, I think, or something on that idea on a regular basis. And I think it's important to go see what the activities are, what they're up to, what they're, how are they using the formula grants, how are they doing the things that are important to making their particular departments function. I get in the truck with the DPW director, and we go around and we look at the roads and we look at the infrastructure, and he says he's got a catch basin failing somewhere, I wanna see where it is, you know, that type of thing. I wanna know how they're doing with things like MS4. It's really important here when you have so much waterway around here. It's not like the ocean outfalls that I was dealing with in Bourne, but you have a lot of conservation land and rivers running through here, and what are your outfalls? I understand you're all septic and well here, and I understand, you know, there's some things down in the lower village. I know there's some development activities wanting to get going there, and how do we make that happen? How does it fit with the community character? So that's how I try to manage, is really trying to be active and engage with the folks that work with me.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Burke?
Thanks for coming in, and I wanted to confirm one thing and then ask you a general question. Bourne does not have, or is not part of a regional school district?
Only the technical school.
Oh, yeah, we've got a technical vocational school.
No, it is not. It has its own high school. However, in my other lives as a municipal manager, I worked with a number of regional high schools. Pioneer Valley School when I was a circuit rider. Warwick Wendell Elementary Union, it was a union school district. Bellows Falls, Rockingham was with Westminster. So I'm familiar with
The dynamic.
regional schools, yes, sir.
I mean, and it's not sir, nobody calls me sir here, but it's Brian, but, the general question that I have is, what are the similarities and dissimilarities between Bourne and, Stow that you've, managed to figure out from your research?
In addition to size, there's quite a bit of difference in budget size. Some of the similarities are you don't get a lot of state aid either. Okay, that's one of the similarities. You're more of a payer than a receiver, type thing. A lot of the similarities, there are village structures. You have the lower village and other areas of town. Bourne had 7 villages distinct, 6 different zip codes too. And there was a rural aspect to Bourne that people don't necessarily see when they're driving on the scenic highway or going over the bridges. But you get down into Katomet or up into Bournedale and some of the other areas, there's a lot of agricultural, be it cranberries to some degree, but there's also some horse farms and some other things there as well. The structure is the same. The charter is very similar between the two communities, where there was a little bit more appointive authority in the Bourne charter. The way that it's structured is very similar. The select board having a veto, if you will, of names brought forward over a 14-day period and things like that. Really, zeros at the end of the budget, I think, are probably the biggest difference. We had a couple of different types of departments there. They have their natural resources department was fairly substantial and was another law enforcement arm that you wouldn't have here. They also took care of the shell fishery.
So those are the dissimilarities that you saw. How about the character of the town? That was really where I was hoping you'd speak.
Okay, Bourne had different, and I don't mean this glibly, it had different characters because of the village structures. Katomet, which was right next to Falmouth, was very different than Sagamore, which was right next to Plymouth. There was a lot of places in between. It had a lot of community pride. It was very concerned about its natural resources. It was very strong on doing some economic development on Main Street, which was in Buzzards Bay. It had to rebuild after the base, the military base shrunk in its size. So there are a lot of similarities I think in character, where there's a good sense of place and concern for the environmental piece and the agricultural piece and the recreating piece. I know that there are several golf courses here. I think there are, I was going over some minutes, there's 54 holes, I think, that are in the residential district. And there's some discussion starting to percolate up about some, what to do there later on.
We have 4 public golf courses, 1 private.
1 private,
But one of the public is 9 holes.
okay.
And it's not really currently operating, although we're hopeful. Sorry,
Okay.
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good to know.
Mr. Ryan?
Where you've read the charter and everything, what do you understand to be the relationship between the town administrator and the selectmen in Stow? And to throw a little twist on it, what would you do with a selectman who starts to stick his nose into places where where it doesn't necessarily belong?
I've lived that chapter. So,
Haven't we all?
In the charter, it's very clear that the select board here is a policy-setting board. That is their main objective under the charter, and they're not supposed to get involved in the day-to-day administration of the community. It's hard sometimes when you're at the coffee shop and you get hit up about X, Y, Z, and you wanna call the town administrator and say, can you take care of this? But generally, if you look at the master plan and you live by the goals of the master plan and you set good, both operational and lofty goals on an annual basis that can be brought, that the town administrator can bring down to the ranks, if you will, and we all work on that together, then you have measurable things that you can judge the town administrator on and how the community is moving in the direction that you folks have set forth on an annual basis. Generally speaking, if I had that type of board member, I would first speak with that board member and say, we're looking like we're getting fuzzy on some of the lines here. What is it that you're looking for that we're not doing? Let's bring it before the board and get a vote. I'm a big believer in having the board vote on things so there's clarity and not misinterpretation of what people want to have done. If that didn't work, I would speak with the chair. I would try to go through the chair. If that didn't convene things to work well, I would ask for an executive session, because it would deal with personnel, and I think we can do that. And if it still continued, I don't know if, I don't remember right now if there's a charter review committee or if there's a charter compliance committee. We had a charter compliance committee in one, and I did it twice, I had to bring that type of action.
We have a charter review, but
Not compliance. So that would be the step I would take on that.
You said something a little while ago I found very interesting. You were talking about department heads, and you said you don't give advice, but sometimes they need it. And picking up on that theme, kind of a management philosophy question. There is sometimes a tension between being collaborative and having a friendly atmosphere and people wanting to come to work and getting results. Can you talk a little bit about that, and can you give me an example or talk to me about a time when you had to give some bad news to a staff member or tell them that they couldn't do something that they wanted to do?
Sure. I think there are three, I'm not the only one who thinks this, but there's three approaches to taking, to decision-making that you can work with, and I have worked with. One is the collaborative approach. Let's all get together and see if we can pull together, and what's your idea of this and what's your idea on that, and the consensus of the group is how we'll go forward. Another approach is I need to have your input. I really need some help here. I'm trying to come up with a policy and I need some input from you folks. But at the end after I get your input, at the end of the day, I have to make the decision, and that's the way it will be. It may not be as collaborative. And then the third is select board or whatever has asked me to do X, and this is the direction we're going to go. Give me the ideas how you're going to get there, but we are going to do this because we have to meet this goal. So an example, probably dealt with our lifeguards or our recreation department. There was a time when this is a small example, I guess, where we guarded 7 beaches. And it was getting very expensive. It was getting really hard to get applicants. And there wasn't a lot of activity on a couple of those beaches. And there was some pushback the year that I went to reduce it to 5, and then there was some pushback the years that we reduced it to 3. There was one year when we had an override issue that failed. We reduced it to 0. And those are the, taking those programs away, the recreation programs, that's where swimming lessons and all kinds of different things that went on. It created some consternation from that department because we also had to reduce staff, regular staff, not seasonal staff, and it went to the, there was a grievance filed and all kinds of things occurred with that. But that's a small example. We certainly had things with the fire and EMS department when we had to reduce the ranks, again, from a failed override. Closed down a station for a short period of time. We had 3 stations in Bourne because of the way the bridges are. And sometimes you just have to make those decisions, and hopefully it's with the select board, certainly. And you have to move forward and then build from that again. Sometimes you 2 steps back and then you have to build forward again.
Thank you. Bill?
Relating to personnel, specifically union,
Mm-hmm.
can you just describe to me the nature of your role and involvement in unions from start to finish? Did you negotiate alone? Grievance procedures, and what level of grievance? Were you on the appeal level? Give me an overview of your role and involvement and experience with the union management.
We had 8 bargaining units in Bourne. We had 4 with Lyuna, in that group, in that family, I call it. We had Superior and Patrol Officers Union and Police. We had 1 union with Fire, and we had a group of, we call it the unaffiliated group. It was a legally recognized bargaining unit, but not affiliated with any national or statewide group. For the most part, I negotiated the contracts within the parameters that we talked, the select board and I would talk and strategize. I would negotiate those contracts without outside help, and was fairly successful with Lyuna, the police, and the unaffiliated group. The fire department contracts always became a little more complicated, and I would have counsel in to assist in those negotiations. And we would end up, we ended up a few times at DLR, on that type of thing, and counsel would go with us on those types of things. Grievances on the first tier, it went to the to the supervisor, then to the department head, then to me. And I would adjudicate those as well. When we got into the situation where, mostly with the civil service, because we were a civil service community for police and fire, I would, if it came to an adjudicatory hearing of that type, I would bring in a third-party hearing officer. And would generally, but not always, take the findings of that hearing officer as my own, as is allowed by statute.
Was the Board of Selectmen formally in the structure of an appeal above you before you got to that next level?
No,
So they weren't involved at all?
no.
Infrequently were there appeals beyond you?
Not very often, mostly with fire. I can only remember one in the 14 years I was there with police, and never, once with Lyuna. So fire was it was a difficult contract.
So from your position, what was the nature and extent of and source of the difficulties with fire, between fire and management?
I'm not sure. The issues were generally that the union felt that the chiefs were overstepping the contract bounds. There was a time in Bourne where I believe the tail was wagging the dog in the fire department, and the select board did too. The town administrator or myself never jumped out in front of anything without the knowledge, consent, and support of the board on these types of things. There were some issues that dealt with termination of employees for legitimate reasons, we felt, and I can't get into those because they're sealed personnel issues, that the union would appeal. And once they got through with DLR, they would also sometimes go to the AAA too. So there was always a 2 bite of the apple, situation. Overall, the fire, I don't wanna make the fire department sound like it was problematic all the time, it wasn't. They were a great bunch of people, there were 40 really dedicated employees, that we were ALS, we were Advanced Life Support, we ran our own ambulance. I know you're, basic life support ambulance here in contract, I think, with an ALS.
Yeah, we belong to
provider.
a regional
Yeah.
district where ALS is
Yeah.
provided through Emerson Hospital
Yeah.
and Cambridge firm.
So, they were excellent, and there was no one if I went down that I'd want taking care of me than these guys and ladies, they were really good. But there was some tension relative to management rights.
Fair to say that there was a governing culture between those two that, so it wasn't just on a case by case, it became a culture where
Yes.
there was tension between the two. There was enough individual grievances and other things that it just then,
You're right, and it just so folks, know, it predated the town administrator form of government. It went back to the full-time board. This has been long-standing.
structural, and
Yeah.
it's hard to stop that once it's
So-
been.
I want to move on to Ms. Frazier. We've already gone through half of our time. Hard to believe.
If appointed town administrator here, can you explain what your plan would be for your first week, your first month, your first year, and, sorry, I just lost my place. How would you suggest we measure your success if we were to do so?
So, the first year, I think we can break, I think I can break down into 2 or 3 different segments. The first being immersion. I wanna be here, I'm gonna attend meetings that I probably wouldn't attend on a regular basis. I wouldn't go to all the normally wouldn't go to all conservation or all planning board or those types of things, but I certainly would do that for the first several months, to really learn the flavor, some of the history, how some of the decision-making has come to be. I would certainly meet frequently with the department leaders. I really want to get their feel for what's the character of the town and how how the police department really functions and what kind of services they offer beyond just law enforcement. Is there a triad program or those types of things available? And how do they interact with the community? As I said earlier, I'll look at every pothole and every catch basin you have in town. I think that's really important. Things I meet with the school superintendent. Because if we don't have a good relationship with the regional school district, it can create a lot of problems at budget time. It can create a lot of problems otherwise. And I want to be sure that the superintendent and I get off on a good footing. I would really sit down with the acting treasurer right now. I want to go over your bonded, what your indebtedness is. You have, I think, eight total issues out right now of temporary and long-term bonds. We kind of went through that the other day on the phone. And that would be like the first 90 to 120 days. I'm going to want to meet with the select board, certainly perhaps have a couple of workshop sessions with the select board beyond regular meetings, to get a flavor for what the goals are, how you would expect things to be reported back. We all have different styles, and I think it's important that I learn what you want for feedback and what you need for information and how you want that presented. I would meet with, if there's a Rotary or a Kiwanis or that type of thing, I'd want to be doing that. I'd hope to be able to do maybe a quarterly show on your local cable access, just to let people know what we're up to. And so that's the first. The next, within the first 6 to 9 months, I would kind of try to synthesize what I had learned from all of that, make some observations and put not an epistle, but a bulleted report to the select board of my findings and what I see are the strengths and the weaknesses, and kind of like a SWOT analysis, but maybe not that detailed, and see where there is commonality, And after the first year, I would like to work with the board to get a plan of attack on how we approach those things that we hopefully mutually agree are the ways to move forward. Either from an organizational perspective, or a much broader perspective from an economic development piece and that type of thing. So you have internal and external type pieces that I'd like to look at.
May I follow up on that? So the plan you just mentioned, is that more of a strategic plan or is that a work plan?
I'm not sure that putting a strategic plan together in that first year would be the smartest thing to do. I don't think I'd have enough background to be able to do that. It would be a work plan and, for lack of a better term, an observatory report. And then I would hope to work with the board to put a strategic plan together. You have your master plan, and I don't know if you adhere to the goals of the master plan right now or not, but the master plan could be a piece that you could have several strategic plans within that master plan. Be it economic development, open space, conservation, infrastructure work, grant writing, those types of things. And I would hope after that 6 months to a year that we would be able to settle in on some fairly broad-reaching goals.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I'm a little, no, actually, I'm a lot interested in the Massachusetts Rural Development Council. And what kind of an organization was that? How did you get the job? And what is that? Was that a state job?
It started out to be part of the Department of Housing and Community Development at the time. It was DHCD at the time. Now
Okay.
it's EOHCD.
So it was a state job?
Well, it was supposed to be. And there was a hiring freeze at the time under Governor Weld. So through an executive order, the council was allowed to go nonprofit. So we became a nonprofit with DHCD as a partner, USDA Rural Development as a partner, Verizon was a partner.
So it wasn't a state job? You weren't getting a state paycheck?
I was not. I wish, I'm still working on getting that time credited back, but that's a whole different discussion. But
Best of luck to you.
yeah, so, because it was supposed to be brought back in after the hiring freeze, and we went through 3 governors in succession there back then. But what we did, from a state perspective, we did community visits. We were over in the Blackstone Valley, helping them set strategic planning and how to get things in motion. We worked on agricultural issues. I was one of the facilitators for the first CISA meeting, community involved in sustaining agriculture. It kind of tends to the Pioneer Valley, but it's supposed to be broader. We worked with the Department of Agricultural Resources as well, worked with various farmers throughout the state. Stillman Dairy, I know we did some work, Jay Healy up there at the time, we worked on crop diversification. And then we worked on things like health and human services, what were the most important issues relative to healthcare in the Commonwealth, and we would convene experts in that and that type of thing.
For agricultural?
No, just, this was straight because of all the different federal agencies that were involved with us. It was, we got a call on a Tuesday afternoon. By Friday, we want to know what the most important health issue is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts right now. So we brought docs in and we kind of convened this thing really quickly, and it came up to be adolescent psychiatric care, because there weren't enough practitioners. And
So
we
that
had to
would-
report that back.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that came under the rubric of Massachusetts Rural Development?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Mr. Ryan?
In a scenario, we end up sending out a budget message, and you've told the department heads, restrict all the salary increases to 2% or less. And you end up getting a department head that starts putting in, for 15% for somebody because they consider them a superstar. How are you gonna work with that?
Well, first, I would look to see what the negotiated contracts indicate that can be, you know, what were set in the contracts. Even with step increases, and that perhaps there is a place for extraordinary efforts. It would be very clear if the budget is calling for a 2% across the board wage increase, no greater than that. We would have to work with the department head and let that person know, as much as we honor the work that person is doing, we are not in a fiduciary position right now to do that. And the budget would come in under the goal that the select board set. There are stars out there too that you know, some people work 70 hours a week and some people work the straight 35 hours or 40 hours a week for the, you know, and there are stars, and sometimes you have to figure out other ways to honor that. We had put together, I don't know if they got it going after I left, an employee appreciation thing. We did an employee appreciation thing annually, but we also had, if you came up with a really good idea, or if there was an employee that was shining above the rest, you know, it may be a dinner certificate, it may be beyond awards, you know, but we could do certain things within the parameters of what's allowed by statute. Certainly, you know, beyond dollars, recognition and saying thank you publicly to people that do a good job, it goes a long way too for building morale throughout the organization.
Yeah, now, some of it, you know, you mentioned within the constraints of union contract. What if there's no union contract involved? Would you consider it? Would you try, you know, are there other ways other than just saying, thanks for putting in 70 hours while the other guy's doing 30?
There are ways. I'm trying to come up with a good example for you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not a union contract, you may be able to offer that person, you know, an additional day off with pay, unless it's in the, you know, unless you have a handbook that says that type of thing, or, you know, you could have a municipal parking place employee of the month. There are a number of types of things you can do. It doesn't always have to be fiduciary. It doesn't always have to be dollars.
Tom, I know that in the past few weeks you've been calling several department heads and having conversations with them, because I've gotten people calling me saying, who's this guy in Vermont called? And I applaud it. I want to ask you, what have you learned, and in particular, putting aside the immediate issues, what do you see as Stow's challenges in the longer run, let's say maybe 10 years, if you've got any thoughts?
So, yes, I have talked to a number of department heads, and they've all been very, very kind with their time, that those that have taken the time. And I, just so you're aware, before I answer that, I made sure that I prefaced my conversations with them saying, I do not want an opinion of what you think of X, Y, Z. I just really want to know how you run your department type of thing. So I didn't want to get into things that were their opinions or became politicized in any way. I just wanted to know.
And I hope you got cooperation.
For those that mostly I did. Acting Chief Salace was very gracious with his time. The Recreation Director, Ms. Greeno, was very good. Lonnie was good. There were a number of folks that were very, very helpful. And I'll say this before I leave, Phoebe and Maureen are both stars. They've been very helpful, as I've gone through this. So for the long term, I think you have some zoning related issues and some economic development related issues that need to be addressed, but you need to have a really good plan on what you're gonna do with that. I know that, I think I mentioned it at the beginning of the interview, you have some activity wanting to take place in the lower village, but you have water, and sewer related issues. You have the Gleason Dale property, that is kinda like an incubator. I'm not sure it's a real incubator.
They're
per se.
attempting to either that or boutique,
Yeah.
to use that term.
I have a son that's in an incubator space right now, with a boutique, so I understand how that kind of thing works. And we started an incubator in Brattleboro when I was with the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation years ago. I think those are issues. I think you have housing density issues. What's going to happen with the large manufacturer in town, or the research and development place is coming into town? You know, with technology changing so quickly, what's their plan? I don't know what it is, but certainly things change all the time. You know, what's their plan up there? How are you going to afford capital needs over a long period of time? Do you have a good capital plan to deal with this building and the community center and the police station and the fire station and all the other things that go with it? Do you have a road? One of the questions I did want to ask, I had on my list, in addition to Chapter 90 money, do you appropriate monies for road construction and paving on
Only
an annualized basis?
A limited amount for smaller public roads. There's a plan for the next several years to do 2 a year. Then there's a small amount for very, very, very basic maintenance to private roads, just to maintain the passability for emergency
Right.
equipment. But, correct me if I misspeak, as a general rule, no, our road maintenance budget is our Chapter 90
Okay.
money. Correct.
That's basically.
No.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Could I just add, though, our new highway superintendent has put in a plan for geocentric satellite modeling of our streets so that we can.
Pavement management.
Yeah,
Mhm.
do I get I'm sure you have the better name at your fingertips.
Pavement
The
management.
pavement management program?
Yes.
Yeah. So the GIS, all your catch basins and
And rate.
Yeah, it's
rate the
programs.
roads,
That's
and yeah, we did that,
located
we did that in Bournemouth Beta Corporation.
Yeah.
So it gives us a better idea
Yeah.
of where we should be spending our Chapter 90 funds, and do we have to exceed that general rule of thumb? I'm sorry if I mean, maybe I shouldn't have
That's all right.
gotten into it.
Were you finished with your answer?
Yes.
Thank you. Bill?
segues into this is a global statement, which is, given the competing interests and needs that are faced every year, as a practical matter, 36 years in the business, long-term planning is great. All I will say to you is a practical matter, again, annual budgets, things that you didn't expect would come up, huge expenses. I mean, we're now facing a PFAS.
Mm-hmm.
And PFAS isn't the first thing we faced that we had no knowledge of the year before. In master planning, I've been involved in creating several of them. In the end, this is a difference of degree and not kind. They're important, but it's the emphasis you put on just how much you're going to try to stay focused on when the urgencies which invariably come up. Speaking of the lower village in water, for example, in
Right.
economic development, I came from an economic development background, came here thinking, and there were some things that I saw as potential, just as you're sitting there. And within the first year, when I brought a couple of them up, one was water. Worked for Dufresne Henry Engineers, which had an office at the time, it's now Stantec out of Canada.
Yep.
Right next door, and we did a lot of water and wastewater treatment design. And in fact, Dufresne Henry at the time was the water engineers and wastewater engineers for both the Acton, West Acton Water District and the Maynard. And one of the principals of the firm, as soon as I got here, started to say, Bill, you know, you're sitting on a lot of water here, right? And we need water for West Acton and Maynard. And the infrastructure and all those things would be paid for by them, plus we'd get money annually. And when my first year, I came up and said, you know, and they asked me, you know, economic development background, what would you do? And I said, one of the first things we could look at, and after that it went downhill because everybody's on their own wells. And of course, leaving aside hydrogeology and subterranean and recharge areas and all the rest of it, their well's gonna go dry. Well, after about 10 minutes, I said, thank you very much,
Right.
you know. And there were a few other mistakes I made when I got here on those things.
Right.
Lowell Village water, for example, you brought it up. I'd be interested in knowing what your thoughts are with respect to the fact that everybody, for the most part, in the direct center of the town, individual wells and septic, and there are those interested in having the taxpayers pay to put in a water supply in the lower village. We'd gotten to the point where we agreed to give our land so that the private businesses could get together and do it. Over fits and starts, it hasn't really progressed, but there's growing interest in maybe having the taxpayers fund it. And talking about competing interest and need, you can imagine what those who pay for their own wells and septics might say about that. I just wondered if you faced those kind of things before.
Well, we had that a very similar situation as it related to wastewater in Bourne, with Buzzards Bay. We were in an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Wareham. We sent up to 200,000 gallons of wastewater to their plant. Which really stymied the growth of Main Street in Buzzards Bay, which we tried to do from an economic development standpoint. We got a growth incentive zone, like an opportunity zone through the Cape Cod Commission. We spent 10 years, this stuff doesn't happen quickly, working on a number of things, and we ended up getting a large grant from EDA for a small 100,000 gallon a day pocket plant, if you will, for downtown. That was matched by a $1.5 million Mass Works grant, and then the town had to kick in a couple of million too of general tax dollars. That was a hard sell, but we were able to sell it not only from an economic development perspective, but we were able to not just sell it. It wasn't a sales job. It was true from a environmental perspective. That this was the less that we had going out into the bays and the less you had going out into the waterways, the better it was overall. With that, we looked at diffs as opposed to diffs of district increment finance as opposed to a tax increment finance. And that did not get off the ground. I don't know if the new manager's working on that now or not. But a district increment finance may be a way to kind of look at that type of piece as opposed to directly sending it all back onto all of the tax bill payers in town. There may be a way to do it with a dip. I don't know. I don't have enough knowledge to be able to speak very
But
intelligently.
you've experienced that kind of
Yes.
tension.
Yes. But the end result, if I could just finish that thought, was a new hotel in downtown Buzzards Bay where there never had been one before. Market rate apartments for 55 and above, the phase 2. 3 new restaurants coming in, and it's a big deal because there were none. And a mixed-use development of mixed use of retail, commercial, and housing with a pad restaurant, which was hopefully a pad restaurant, which that's happened since I've left, which is a really big deal for down there. We put a new park in, did our town common over, so we call it the town park because it's really not a common. And so I'm aware of those, and I'm aware of the difficulties within the citizenry, that there's always competing interest for the bonding dollars, there's always competing interest for what about my neighborhood, there's always competing interest for, we really need to put more money here, why are you bothering to do it there? And that's where a good working relationship with the select board, the EDIC, all of those different pieces you have together, there has to be meetings of the mind on this. And you need to get together as a group frequently, frequently being semi-annually. I don't think you need to do it on a monthly basis, but.
So to identify and define to begin with economic development, which is the first step. In Stow, I believe there are, again, competing understandings and interest in what are we talking about when we say economic development. again, I made a mistake early on based on my
Right.
background to think what it was, and then found out the character of Stow, you know.
Stow, from what I've been able to glean, really prides itself on its agricultural, not just history, its current agricultural use. It's conservation of space, and you can do that, you can continue that, you need to, because that's what brings people here, that's what Stow is about, that's the character of the community. But you can look at your downtown area or your commercial areas, and you can look at density issues down there. You can be a little denser. You may be able to put, you know, if there's too much traffic or it's too fast, maybe you put calming devices in, you know, little islands and bump outs and things like that. Maybe you've already done that.
We've done some.
Okay, you know,
We thought of it.
We've had that conversation.
those are always popular too. But maybe you look at your height requirements. Not unlimited height, but maybe that's a good way to create that village center without sprawling. I don't know, I'm not here, I haven't done that research yet, but I'm throwing out ideas that I've gleaned over the past.
So I have to point out, I think we started a little bit late, but I think we're at the point where I should be asking the candidate for his questions for us. I wanna ask two, if I may, one clarification question and then one other question that I just have to ask. When you were just talking about the water solution that you came up with, you said pocket plant. Was that a town-operated pocket plant or a nonprofit or the businesses or what?
Currently, again, it was it was a town-owned facility, okay, the town paid, it's still going in, and they're doing the directional drill under the highway right next to the new police station. It will be municipally owned. The operation of that had not yet been determined, whether it was gonna be municipally managed or if it was gonna be a contract management system.
Okay.
There was some talk about teaming up with the school district because they had a plant over at the high school. All the schools are in the same complex. And it's really, so that we may have hired one person or two people to take care of both. We were gonna try to use feeder employees out of the tech school because they had the licensing program there. So there were a number of different ways.
And Bourne obviously already had a water department.
No, the
Did
water
not.
departments in Bourne were private, they're public districts, they were quasi. But the town of Bourne did not run its own water department at all.
But you had treatment plants, they were just privately.
Quasi.
There were three water districts.
Districts. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
The wastewater was an intermunicipal agreement. Only a small part of the town was sewer, only Buzzards Bay, parts of Buzzards Bay. And that was under an IMA with the decree with EPA and DEQE at the time.
You're going back to my days, HCD and.
Well, yeah.
Let me ask this one wrap-up question, then I assume you have questions for us?
I do.
Okay. Going from, I spent some time in Bourne, I used to ride the PMC, and so
Oh, good for you.
I went through a lot of it. Tom was in the emergency center for a long time. Going from being town administrator in Bourne to being town administrator in Stow seems to me to be not a lateral move, maybe even a little bit of a step down. Am I incorrect? Or if I'm correct, why does it nonetheless interest you?
I don't see it that way. It is a smaller community, but that doesn't mean it's a step backwards community. I don't see it that way. I see some opportunities for my expertise here. I see my agricultural and rural development background being helpful here. I think my personality may lend itself better here. I didn't look at it that way when I applied. I looked at the community. I visited the community. I really did spend I spent quite a bit of time here. And I thought that this might really be a good place for me to be. I plan to work, notwithstanding this, because of situations that I've discussed a little earlier, I've got another 10 years I gotta work. And
I was gonna ask you how long, cause you,
Yeah.
I was gonna go back to my.
I was gonna bring up Byron Matthews, but that would have been really bad. You know, I'm gonna work a while, and this really is a good fit for me, I think, and I hope it's a good fit for the town. One of the things that I hope to be able to do, and I said again earlier, so I don't wanna be redundant and run out of things to say, but I want people who work for the town, and there's no reflection on you, sir, I don't mean it, but I want them to be happy to come to work every day. I want them to be jazzed up about what we're doing as an organization. And I think I can do that, and I'm sure you have done that. I'm not suggesting
Sometimes it
otherwise.
works, sometimes it doesn't.
You do the best you can.
Despite your best efforts.
You know, you could have everything going really well and somebody took somebody's sandwich out of the refrigerator and it kind of blows the whole thing for the day. But those things happen, and I understand that. I know that I can do a good job here.
Thank you. And what questions do you have for us, Tom?
Thank you. Actually, I think I brought most of them up during the. I did have a question. How involved is the town, or is it a part of, again, this is kind of part of the area where I don't know, are you part of the 495 compact?
I don't know that we're formally part.
We're not a member. I receive regular correspondence from them. We're kind of on the periphery because of where the focus is
Yeah.
there. And it's been, and again, the economic development that they're speaking of is not economic development that the town of Stow, would probably compete for within the district.
Okay.
You know, it's bigger towns along the
Yeah,
highway and all the
right,
rest.
right.
And then some of it from my own experience and frustration, well, not frustration, I mean that in a negative way. The character of Stow is, you know, like you
Different.
said, it's not gonna, a big box building, like
Right.
deck or something, you know.
But I'll add this, our state representative, Kate
She's-
Holger, is very involved with it.
Okay,
Is at least an informal conduit to them and some of their ideas. Work done at the 495 compact has kind of come up sometimes in discussions about how regional transportation can in some ways help us. We've been exploring, and we're on the verge of doing something about a van from Stow to the South Acton train station.
okay.
And then the coronavirus pandemic hit. But, so we have informal contacts with them, and I'll
Okay.
leave it at that.
Which allows me to bring up my time as chair of the Regional Transit Authority on the Cape. So I have some of that experience, and we did some transportation work when I was with the Rural Development Council as well. First iteration of GIS back then too. Okay, thank you for that. One of the things I heard, and I don't want to get anyone in trouble.
Always an auspicious beginning.
Brian, what did you do?
Gotta be me.
I would speak in cryptic terms now.
Yeah,
just
I
so
am.
you
I'm gonna-
understand.
The summer program, in your rec department, is been closed for the season due to this COVID issue that you have. And I asked this kind of in the initial interview too, so how are the rest of those programs going to survive if the revolving fund funds them? And that's, recreation, library, council on aging. Those are the great equalizers in a community. Everyone can participate type thing, and so that's something that I would be thinking about if I came in. That would be one of the things that I would think about.
I'm not sure I understand what you're
I
asking.
do. May I respond?
Yeah.
Well, he's saying that, we're all anticipating financial setbacks in state aid. Our unrestricted state aid on the municipal side, negligible, $415,000.
Yeah,
we're expecting a big hit indirectly through Neshoba, possibly Minuteman. What Tom is raising is that there are certain revolving funds, and recreation is a good example, that are replenished by user fees, and usage is down. So that is a backdoor, unexpected, possible hit also. I think you're right, and another one obviously could be, we probably should expect an extremely low match to our community preservation grant next year.
Are you on the 3%? Are you 3% on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point, thank you.
So, to that point, my answer would be that we began to, when I arrived here, there was no rec department essentially, and then we took on a part-time director. And their predecessors early on made the decision to support it going forward with taxpayers' money only so long as was necessary, so that they did become self-reliant,
Right.
self-sufficient based on user fees. And they have grown and expanded their programs such that I think there's 20 plus or minus programs, and that decision included for the board, and it was my job to implement, is that they would slowly, the amount of money that we were providing would be back down until they did in fact, and even including last year, I was still backing down the amount of expenses that were coming from the taxpayer to go to, and it's 21 is just
Right.
about the max of it. And I think for me, the answer would be, unless the policymaker decide to change, is that you do some of the
Yeah.
programs. Because inherent in that question is the answer that, well, if they're suffering, the taxpayers are suffering, if
Right.
you're gonna increase the burden on the taxpayers, I mean, that is a choice that will have to be made, but if I was still sitting here when it happened, my first choice would, you're gonna have to manage, and they've carried a lot of money over each year, beyond their needs, that, and there's a limit by
Right.
statute,
Right.
you know, and so I got it, part of it was me just eating up some of that excess. But the other thing I would tell you is that I think the nature of our constituency group here, I mean, one of the structural impediments on the revenue side is that we've got an undiversified tax base, it's getting worse. It's the residential
Yeah.
taxpayer. On the other hand, we've been somewhat resilient because of the folks working here, and I know there's discussions about furloughing and the 112 budget and all the rest of it, but year to date, many of our folks are still working. They're working from home
Yeah.
perhaps, but they're not as subject to as some others. So to the degree there's an over-reliance
Yeah.
on our revenues by that, it is actually, it's actually insulating us some, and our revenues are not unlike the states. I think our only real exposure is what's gonna happen to the
The
district,
schools.
which that will liquidate.
Yeah,
It's a good point, really, ultimately it's gonna be a push-pull,
right.
but
It's just,
Yeah.
it's just something that hit me. The other, question I had, and you just hit on that, is you're at a $20.18 or thereabouts.
2021.
Okay, tax rate, you're not far from bumping up against the ceiling over time.
Yep.
And one of the things that, I guess I'm gonna pontificate for a second, then I'll let you go. One of the things that we started to do in Bourne, is look at something called priority-based budgeting. I learned about it at a conference, and I was really hot on it. Some people in Bourne weren't. But you look at programs, everything that everybody offers in the municipality. And in police, they'll say, we don't do programs, they'll look at it as tasks. And we kind of start with what's mandated by law, okay, like your town clerk, most of what they do is mandated by statute. What conservation does is a lot of times mandated by statute. Police and fire mandated by, fire's mandated by statute. There's no, and then there's police. And then you look at, okay, what is necessary because of local bylaw or town meeting vote? And you look at those as I don't wanna say a second tier, but another tier. And then you look at the things that aren't required by statute, and that's your nice to haves, even though they may be required in a community. Library, recreation, those council on aging, those types of things. It may be that those things are imperative in a community, even though they're not set up by statute. And are there programs in rec, maybe you offer yoga, maybe there's a yoga class. Is there a private company in town that offers yoga class? Is there a synergy? I'm just, these are.
I haven't investigated that.
I can't, I can't.
That surprises me, actually.
Yeah, I can't. I'd like to, but I can't.
Something for you to start, Brian.
But, instead of the rec department perhaps offering that, maybe you go into a partnership and you underwrite some of the costs for folks to take part of that, and it's kind of shifting it and allowing private people to continue on with their private business.
Interesting, and it is the approach that you're required to take by looking across the spectrum on any area you can. I will say this, though, about the tax rate, which I've lowered twice in the last 4 years. We've got more of a revenue problem than we have an expenditure problem, I think. But even on the expenditure side, you're gonna control 20-something%.
Right, I know.
So when you're talking that way, my experience has told me, I've heard a lot of that,
Yeah.
but until the bulldogs, you're able to,
We used to call it the alligator jaw, and we kept finding that alligator jaw splitting, expenditure versus revenue. And yes, you're spending, some $18 million, $19 million out of $32 million in 64% in your education.
Right, it's going, and here's
That's
the other
good.
structural
That's good.
impediment we have on the expenditure side, is that our tech school is costing close to 40 grand per.
Yeah,
And because of what tech schools offer now, hydrogeology,
Right.
nanotechnology, graphic design, it's not the old one, so many, and we're facing it next year, the number I just got from the show, that are going up there. So that's gonna be an uncontrollable cost that is, in my opinion, much more significant, direct, and certain than these smaller things over time. So that will be the burden
Right.
that my successor has, and this town has, in trying to worry about the tax rate staying below
So-
where it is, and that's gonna,
So we are trying to keep the interviews to roughly the same way.
yeah, I know, and I apologize for droning,
That's
I
all
didn't
right.
mean to do that.
Do something very quick.
No, I don't have any burning desire at this point relative to questions. There's certainly a number of questions that I did have. But I do appreciate the time that you've allowed me today.
And we appreciate you coming in. This was, I have a feeling we could keep the conversation going for at
Right.
least another hour. Everyone who's a municipal budget finance nerd, which we're all turning into. Thank you so much for coming all the way down here, Tom. Very, very much appreciate it. I can say a few words about the process going forward.
I was gonna ask.
We expect to be deliberating at our next regular meeting, which is Tuesday.
Okay.
Hopefully making a decision, if a majority of the board though wants a second round of interviews or whatever, then we do that.
Okay.
And then, obviously we'll be reaching out to someone to start contract negotiations. Was it a hand up or are you just twiddling the pen?
I'm just twiddling
Oh,
the
okay.
pen, and again, I'd spend hours too, but we have to be fair to everybody.
And it's Saturday afternoon too.
No,
Mr.
Oh, is it
Ryan
Saturday?
has.
I'm not gonna do anything.
Mr. Ryan has one closing question.
Just one last question is, after we've grilled you at this point and all this stuff and tortured you on a Saturday afternoon, do you feel that if you were offered this position, it's something that obviously subject to negotiation, you're still interested in?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, I've been very picky.
Mhm.
And this is a town that I believe I can come in seamlessly and work with. I just wanna stress, don't let the Vermont thing bother you.
I can't speak for anyone else, but I think that message got across.
Okay.
I commuted from Greenfield for 3.5 years, my first
Yeah.
tour.
And he's so wonderful, he's not in a rush to get out of the meetings at all.
When are you on the council? Thank you. all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
1990?
Mr. Stow TV, I think we're ending now.
Well,
Thank
we
you
have to
very
adjourn,
much.
move to adjourn.
So would you work with Norm? Was
Motion to
Norm there?
adjourn.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah,
Second.
yeah.
No further,
When will you,
Jane
discussion
Napoli?
process.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Select
yes.
Board's
We
office
will.
at the
Thank you.
time.
Sorry, Brian.
Well, thank you,
What?
Mr. Grace.
I think we've just
Yeah,
shut
that's
it
it
off.
for
The
3
chair
years.
Okay.
Lived
previously
in,
mentioned that
Doesn't
he
matter, I
wanted
think it's
to
gonna be very quick.
have a
Across the
quick
street.
conversation
My dad
amongst
Oh,
ourselves.
okay, you wanna have a quick
Pretty much had
conversation?
died for
Very
decades,
quick.
Okay.
so
Yeah, that's
we
fine.
shut- We're from the area anyway.
Well, you know,
I
where Pierce
apologize, I
Street
forgot.
School used to be.
It's hard to keep
if you
track of
jump
all
the
the
fence,
nonsense
I
he
lived
talks
on the
about.
other side of that.
Are you a native this?
Yeah.
Are you a?
Gentlemen, we're actually trying to wrap up our meeting, I'm sorry. If you wanna continue talking outside, for old hope, we can.
Take the water, take some brownies.
Yeah,
No brownies,
please,
I'm going to
please.
Erickson's.
Okay.
Oh, Eric.
You're still live.
Their ginger is very good.
I ginger.
Jonathan, I think this is gonna be 30 seconds. Kathy, I hope you still have the Zoom meeting going. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all.
Thank you, nice to
Thanks,
meet
Tom.
you.
So I did put on the agenda, just in case we feel like deliberating now. May I assume we don't, I know, I'll speak for myself, I don't, I wanna think about my rankings, and I could not articulate why I believe my rankings on right now.
We're,
Thank you.
yeah, public
Just for a second,
meeting.
public meeting. So unless the three of you hit me over the head, I'm gonna suggest that we just save our deliberations for Tuesday.
Works for me.
Works for me, and I know Tom's been sitting here and he's been getting some emergency calls.
Have you?
No, no.
Yes.
I just
Okay.
got one, so
So let's-
I know it's not an emergency.
So
Oh,
let's.
good.
Okay, good. So, Tuesday, please come prepared with,
When you say come, you mean virtually.
well, actually, Ms. Frazier asked me that, I would encourage physical attendance, but if you don't feel comfortable with it, then Zoom in. It's fine.
I wanna come in for a group hug.
Yeah, we're all looking forward to that.
You couldn't have got that.
Now I'm
done.
wearing the hat.
Maybe I will zoom in.
We do have, in addition to this, we have a number of other important things to talk about. But technology is wonderful, Zooming is fine, if that's what you prefer.
I'll be here, hug buddy.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
I just got nauseous, all right.
You too.
So, please be prepared to come in with your own personal 1 through 3 rankings. We'll give them scores, we'll discuss. You feel free to move them around in the course of the discussion, that's what it's all about. We'll total up into an initial group ranking, make sure everybody is, or a majority is comfortable with it, and then take a vote. If you wanna do another round of interviews, say that. Is that
Speaking
clear?
of process, if we have some discrete data points that we'd just like to collect, who do we send that to?
Data points we wanna collect.
Of the candidates,
The town administrator, I assume.
as the
By
chair
data
places.
points, what are we referring
Let me think about it.
to? I love a question like that.
And with that.
Random data.
So
with
just-
that, I
I'll
think
whisper it to you when we
Wanna
hug.
clarify,
Yeah.
so we'll tally our rankings and then, have individual motions to suggest a particular person, or
I think what we'll
go
do
by
is
the
we'll
ranking?
just go around the table. You'll say, well, I put him in this order. I really like so-and-so because yada yada. I liked all of them, but so-and-so was my number 3 for this reason, that reason. He'll do the same thing all around. Hopefully there will be some kind of a consensus. If not, then somebody makes a motion, and I think the motion should be in the form of to invite contract negotiations with candidate A. If those negotiations are not successful, candidate B. If those negotiations are not successful, candidate C. So the motion will be in the form of a ranking, and we'll see, and whichever one of those motions, if any, gets a majority, the first one, that's what we do.
Great.
As the chair pleases.
Are you interested in my input or?
Absolutely.
Yes,
So-
please.
So I'll be just commenting.
For the next few months, after that, I don't know.
Hey, look, I understand.
No, please, what?
No, I mean,
Oh, you mean on
that,
Tuesday?
when you're
Yes,
discussing,
yes.
Well,
obviously I can't vote, but I
Yes,
mean, do you
obviously.
want-
Yes, obviously. You wouldn't be here asking questions if we weren't interested in your opinion.
Yeah,
so I'm saying.
and I would say, you know, give us your, you know, same rankings. You know, maybe you don't get you don't
Yeah,
get a vote.
There's a distinction between members of the board and the town administrator, so I would definitely want his input, but
I mean, I am an ex officio by charter.
True.
So it's not as though, this would be,
you say whatever you wanna say.
okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
you say whatever you wanna say. You're not gonna get a vote.
Like it's gonna be any different
Right.
for the last 28 years.
No, I'm consistent if nothing else.
Anything else
God
probably
bless
before the
him.
board? Any other business probably before the board today?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.